Good morning, folks. This is the Wednesday, November 20th, 2019 morning session of the Portland City Council. Carla, could you please call the roll?
Udaly,
Here.
Fritz.
Here.
Fish, Hardesty,
Here.
Wheeler.
Here, and I have one question, Carla. So the displays will not be functioning this morning. Will people be able to see this on TV?
That is my understanding, yes. We
Okay,
have-
so for those of you in the chamber, obviously we have some technical difficulties this morning. Presentations will apparently not be seen on the overhead projector, so what we're going to do is try and make sure that we have enough copies of each of the presentations so that people in the chamber can follow along as people are giving presentations, and I apologize for that inconvenience. Similarly, colleagues, before we move into our regular council meeting, I'd ask that we take a moment of silence to recognize and acknowledge Transgender Day of Remembrance, to reflect on those who've lost their lives due to acts of anti-transgender hate and violence. Please join me in a few moments of silence. Thank you. I appreciate it. Now we'll hear from legal counsel on the rules of order and decorum. Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome to the Portland City Council. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during City Council meetings so everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions or first readings of ordinances. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. If it does not, you may be ruled out of order. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light goes on. When your time is done, a red light goes on. If you are in the audience and would like to show your support for something that's said, please feel free to do a thumbs up. If you want to express you do not support something, please feel free to do a thumbs down. Please remain seated in council chambers unless entering or exiting. If you are filming the proceedings, please do not use bright lights or disrupt the meeting. Disruptive conduct such as shouting or interrupting testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe.
And colleagues, today, just by way of a heads up for everyone, you'll recall last Wednesday, I think we were in session for about 9 hours with a brief break. This week's agenda is just as full, if not fuller than last week's. So we're going to, we will hear communications. Everybody who has communications has 3 minutes to testify. Sometimes there's invited testimony, and we allow invited testimony to go for however long the commissioner in charge of the item would like that testimony to go on. We would ask that public testimony today be limited to 2 minutes. So please think about planning your remarks in terms of 2 minutes, the purpose being so that we can actually get through the agenda by the close of business this evening. So first up is communications.
Item 1054, request of Stan Herman to address council regarding Tell Me the Truth.
3 minutes each. Name for the record, please. Good morning.
Morning. Go ahead. Okay, my name's Stan Herman. I'll wait a moment until the mayor gets back.
You feel free to start. We all multitask on a regular basis, so
Okay,
trust me.
thank you. Well, Mr. Fish is gone, and I reviewed his response to me last month, and I wanted to thank him for the input. It was the first input I got from him, and it was well taken. As I mentioned before, I was one of the founders of a 4Dimension Club. The 4D Club is a drug and alcohol recovery club, and with 600 members and growing. I have 5 houses, and I provide housing for 27 drug and alcohol recovery people in the community. And I just heard on the news about Wapato, and I've heard you on the radio about Wapato. I don't want to hear too much about it again, but our system, our program would have worked, and I was going to present that to the Wapato people. But since that's down the road, we'll address that maybe sometime later. But Fritz and Hardestein, I'd like to give you some pictures of what I wanted to talk to you about in a meeting, so you're a little bit more of maybe what I'm about. The first picture is a hotel on the Mississippi in Albina. That was there years ago when they were building shipyards, building ships, and it's been vacant for years. And that property on the second page is a drawing of a 120-unit low-income apartment property that can be built for drug and alcohol recovery people. Our system would work perfectly for that type of system. The third page is building of my warehouse that the homeless burned down 2 years ago. They're $8 million, but I'd like to get your thoughts on making a canoe and kayak park on that site. It's a wonderful site for facilities for lower income kids that need a facility versus the facility down there by the Hawthorne Bridge. And the LCI 713 Restored Navy Ship is also a museum that would like to be at that site. In fact, I'd like to invite Amanda and Joanne to visit the ship in Swan Island. Amanda, you'd be amazed at the medical room that they have on that ship that they had to deal with in World War II. And Joanne, being a Navy person, the museum, there's a recovered Japanese Zero flag along with other World War II Navy things to see. If you haven't been there, I'm inviting you to go see that. In closing, yeah, Joanne, you and I like the same kind of music. I saw you at the Prime Rib, and I really like what you're doing on KBOO. That really informs us a lot, and I enjoy listening to you on the radio. That last picture was the canoes and kayaks for kids, and then second to last, and the last one was the restored ship. I actually got some passes on there. They really don't mean anything with the passes. They meet every Saturday morning. If you or any of your friends want to go visit it, let me know. It'd be fun to see.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next individual, please, Carla.
Item 1055, request of Christine Anderud to address council regarding business owner homeless situations. She is not able to make it.
Very good. Next individual, please.
Item 1056, request of David Potts to address council regarding the difference between the Lentz Neighborhood Association versus the Lentz Neighborhood Livability Association.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor Wheeler and City Commissioners. My name is David Potts, and I am the president of Lentz Neighborhood Livability Association, not to be confused with the city-funded, city-recognized Lentz Neighborhood Association. We are a 501c3 whose mission is to serve, engage, and inform the citizens of Lentz. A big difference between us and the city-recognized neighborhood association is that we are financially self-supporting. The LNA uses its taxpayer money to fund board members' private business, social enterprises, and pet projects, $2,000 at a time. Since our inception in September 2017, we have been accused of being NIMBYs and violent towards the homeless population. We are just the opposite. We have helped people by taking them to emergency rooms, talked to them as people, and recently assisted a homeless person navigate the registration process and got him into services. Our first cleanup was around the Oliver P. Lentz grade school. Our first and last city grant was for a neighborhood cleanup, which took us 1.5 years to get reimbursed for. We have helped several neighbors in Lentz remain in their homes by doing minor as well as major repairs, such as rehabbing an entire kitchen that was infested with rats. We removed the remains of a neighbor's burnt-down garage, which had been set on fire twice by squatters. She subsequently received code violations from BDS and the fire department, and through our assistance avoided being fined. We built entry stairs for another couple, helped do yard work and interior painting for Portland Homeless Family Solutions, spent days clearing the brush and weeds from the Lentz Monument, helped paint one woman's house who could not afford to hire a professional painter. We regularly partner with the local church's Neighbor to Neighbor program. Many of their care receivers are referred to them by Bureau of Development Services due to code violations. Their model is to build a rapport with and give ongoing assistance to the homeowner so that BDS will remove them from the violation list. We have provided Thanksgiving dinners to needy families for the past 2 years. The first year, we provided 22 families with turkeys. Last year, we provided 25 families with entire meals, and this year, we will provide 50 families with entire meals. We regularly work with law enforcement, Central City Concern, and Rapid Response to report criminal activity, arrange for wellness checks, and haul off bags of trash we collect while cleaning the streets and alleys in our neighborhood. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a better understanding of who we are. If you're ever interested to find out more about us, please feel free to join us at one of our events or our annual community potluck Christmas dinner on December 12th. We would like to be a part of making Portland a better place to live. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We appreciate your coming in today.
Item 1057, request of Craig Rogers to address council regarding trust and local government.
Good morning.
Good morning, council. Mayor, because you came out and took that walk with me in my neighborhood, you're going to know here where I'm talking about. Here's the Willamette River. There's my neighborhood. This is off the police website. And my neighborhood is relatively a clear color, and this is different. It's because mine has less crime. The color around it actually is the same color as downtown Portland. I go out and I go on patrol every day. Go down the end of the dead-end streets. You reached over a fence and you shook hands with a young man named Russell.
I remember that.
That's his first house, first wife, first child, lives there on that street. 2 months ago, I went down to the end of that street. I smell smoke. There's somebody in those trees in there building a fire, and he's out there. I look closer. I wouldn't have seen him because he blended in, but he's collecting firewood. And this is a windy day, about the same time those windy fires down in California and pine needles all. So then I just text the principal, Floyd Light Middle, and that's actually Floyd Light property. So he came up, gave him 5 minutes. Problem solved. But you saw too where another gentleman said, tell him about the fire. So there's a lot of crime that could happen around there, but I patrol it every day, and that's why it's that color.
Thank you.
And I once asked an officer who was called out there and showed up between Floyd Light and the park in Habitat for Humanity. And I asked him about this tying the police hands things, and he says, we know this is a violation of he says it comes down from above. We know this is a violation of the law, but we don't want you to enforce it. Those are his exact words.
Who said that?
You know what? I've had a lot of officers tell me the same thing, and I trust.
Okay, next time one of them
I
says
just,
it,
quite
ask them-
frankly,
ask
I am
them
not going
who
to
said it.
violate their trust in me.
Okay, well, I'm
these
just telling you, I
officers
don't
tell me
believe
a
it.
lot.
I don't believe it.
It's fine.
Until you give me facts to the contrary, I don't believe it.
Sometime we should talk, just the two of us.
Fair
Portland Mayor on misconduct by homeless people, laws will be enforced. And this is the recent survey. According to respondents, homelessness is perceived as the top challenge facing Portland. In your announcement to run for mayor, you can't claim to be progressive if you're not making progress on helping the homeless to get off the streets. And this surprised me. This is November right now, the Southeast Examiner, and it says Oregon ranks 49th for access to drug and alcohol treatment. I gotta wonder, where are those millions and millions and millions of dollars going?
At the
See.
federal level.
So here, KATU Channel 2, KATU News, Portland ranked as most dangerous city in Oregon. Oregon's 20 safest cities. I brought this up before. I had to really dig in, and Portland's number 35.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Item
Next
10
individual,
sorry,
please.
1058, request of Dr. Theodora Songas to address council regarding Zena's proposal to build a pipeline for methyl dipenthal isocyanate.
Is she not here? It doesn't appear that she's here.
Right.
Carla, have any items been pulled off the consent agenda?
Yes, we've had 3 items pulled.
Okay.
Item 1065,
Yep.
1068,
Okay.
and 1069.
All right, call the roll on the remainder, please.
Udaly,
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Hardesty,
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye, the consent agenda is adopted. First time certain item is number 1059, please.
Authorize the second amended and restated Visitor Facilities Intergovernmental Agreement with Multnomah County and Metro.
Colleagues, I'm going to move some substitute documents in a moment, but first I just want to say I'm very pleased to introduce this item. It reflects the culmination of many months of hard work by my staff, the city's chief administrative officer, and our counterparts at both Metro and Multnomah County. I'm also grateful to Travel Portland for their incredible work in constantly driving and improving the travel and tourism industry in our city. Without their hard work, patience, assistance, and understanding, none of the important investments this agreement allows would even be possible. This item, which is the second amendment to the Visitors Facilities Intergovernmental Agreement, otherwise known as VFIGA, continues the important practice of investing dollars generated by the travel and tourism industry, notably transient lodging taxes and vehicle rental fees, into the publicly owned venues that help support the same industry. This amendment will help support the much-needed renovation of the Veterans Memorial Coliseum and the Portland Five's Centers for the Arts buildings, as well as providing crucial operating support for these and other important venues. It also continues and increases the dollars available to attract major conventions to our city by increasing support for the Visitors Development Fund. And made possible by the hard work and success of the travel and tourism industry in our city, this amendment reflects that the VFIGA is now able to dramatically increase the tourism-generated dollars that go towards services and programs that support our most vulnerable populations, those that are either experiencing or at the risk of experiencing homelessness. In other words, to provide services to the most chronically homeless to help them get off and stay off the streets. Tom Reinhardt, the CAO, will now present the item after I move the substitute documents. And I'd like to move 3 as a package. I'd like to move the impact statement, Exhibit A and Exhibit B, all of which you have received. Can I get a second? I have a second from Commissioner Fritz. Is there any discussion on these substitute amendments? Please call the roll.
Udaly,
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Hardesty,
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye, the substitute documents are on the table. CAO Reinhardt, good morning.
Good morning, Council. My name is Tom Reinhardt, Chief Administrative Officer. My team and I are very happy to finally be at this point after 2 years of hard work with our partners. During these years, many talented people have been instrumental in getting us here today. I want to thank them. Government Relations Director Elizabeth Edwards, City Economist Josh Harwood, former CFO Jennifer Cooperman, Ken McGarrett to my right here from the City Attorney's Office, Spectator Venues Program Manager Carl Lyle to my left. Thanks as well to the many City Hall staff on your teams who played a key role, particularly Kristen Dennis in the Mayor's Office. Lastly, on the list of important City of Portland acknowledgements, thanks to former Spectator Venues Program Manager Susan Hartnett, who had the vision for renegotiating this IGA with an understanding of the opportunities it presented to all of us. It is not an exaggeration, to say we wouldn't be here today without her leadership. Thank you, Susan. Thanks as well, finally, to Jeff Miller and Brian Duran with Travel Portland and our colleagues at Metro and Multnomah County for the time and significant effort they have invested to get this agreement completed. Ken and Carl are going to give you an overview of the key changes in a minute, but before that, I wanted to address you in my role as CAO on 2 points. First, Council has taken important and critical steps over the past few years to address long-standing deferred maintenance needs in our transportation, parks, and civic infrastructure. This agreement with regional partners takes another long-needed step to upgrade and maintain our assets, like the mayor mentioned, in this case, Veterans Memorial Coliseum and the Portland Five Centers for the Arts buildings. My team has already put together an advisory committee for the reconstruction effort of the Coliseum, and we look forward to engaging all of you during this formative stage in 2020. Second, Part of my role in a process like this is to ask, what are the risks? And have we appropriately protected the city against potential negative outcomes? I want to be clear with all of you today. I believe the city's risk is appropriately protected in this new agreement, provided we keep in mind the initial premise that this system needs to be fed by visitors coming to Portland and paying transient lodging taxes in order to keep the fund strong. If the 5-year forecast shows any downturn and a need to reduce spending in order to protect our reserves, we will not hesitate to recommend these reductions, however unpopular they may be. With that, I want to turn it over to Ken and Carl to explain the important changes in the amended agreement.
Thank you. Carl Lyle. Is that on?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Carl Lyle, Spectator Venues and Visitor Activities Program Manager. So the amended agreement in front of you is the result of really several years of hard work that began as an effort to develop a strategic plan for the agreement that would guide future amendments. During that conversation, the growing urgency of the various needs being identified and the opportunity to make immediate progress in addressing them shifted that conversation from a strategic plan to an amendment of the IGA. In May 2018, Mayor Wheeler, Chair Kafori, and then Metro President Hughes signed a letter of agreement providing direction to the team to amend the Visitor Facility Intergovernmental Agreement, or VFIGA. That letter established 4 key priorities which have framed the discussion and are represented in the amendments before you today. I'm going to very briefly cover the key details of the allocation amendments, the adjustments in those allocations, using those 4 priorities as in the letter of agreement. Then Ken will touch briefly on key changes in the governance and oversight structure in the agreement. So first, consistent with the community livability and safety priority, 2 allocations are dedicated as new funding for the provision of services and programs for people experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of becoming homeless, and to address community livability and safety concerns often associated with homelessness. The first renames an existing allocation in the agreement called the County Visitor Facilities and Operations Support Bucket to Livability and Safety Supportive Services base amount. This allocation in fiscal year 1920 is $1,775,000, and that amount is escalated by CPI annually. The second allocation, called the Additional Livability and Support amount, is established in this amendment and as follows. For the first 2 years, that's fiscal years 1920 and 2021, that amount is the difference between the base amount, that $1,775,000, and $2.5 million. So it's $725 in the first year and slightly less because of that escalation in the second year. And that is the subject of changing that first year amount was the reason that we filed the substitute documents earlier this week. So that really was the only substantive change reflected there. The combined amount of these 2 allocations for livability and safety gradually increases in the amendments until reaching a combined total of $5.25 million in annual support in fiscal year 2023-24. And then that amount continues annually thereafter. The projected combined totals for these new allocations for fiscal 1920 through 29-30, so for the next 10 years, is just over $51 million. This is the single largest program in the agreement, operations program, so not the bond programs, and more than quadruples the funds available from this source available to support services and programs related to homelessness needs. Second, consistent with the healthy facilities priority in the letter of agreement, several changes are included in the amendments. The first, this agreement includes new bond support for capital renovation projects at key city-owned venues. Those are the Veterans Memorial Coliseum, or VMC, and the Portland 5 Center for the Arts, or P5. This support is set at up to $40 million in bond or debt proceeds for each potential project, and it escalates from 2019 using construction cost escalation. The VMC allocation cannot begin before January 2021, and the Portland 5 or P5 allocation cannot begin before 2024. While we know that $40 million for each of these projects is likely not enough to fully address the needs at those aging venues, we believe the funding can become a very important foundation upon which we can build and add other funds, both public and private, to make those projects really successful. So without going into further details, other changes that can meet healthy facilities priorities include modest increases in many of the existing facility operations allocations and some future increases to those allocations, and a new allocation for the Portland Expo Center, which previously has not been included in this system. Third, consistent with the adequate visitor development fund priority, two existing VDF, that's the Visitor Development Fund, allocations are merged into a single allocation and increased to $2.5 million annually. The VDF grants funds to meetings and conventions that are considering coming to Portland and are often the key to landing those major events, particularly in the slower times of the year. These grants have historically yielded a 27-to-1 return on investment, including a commitment to occupy hotel rooms, which in turn produces more tax revenue. Total estimated VDF allocations under the existing agreement through fiscal year 29-30 is $19 million, which grows under these amendments to an estimated $31.2 million in the amended agreement. Using the historic rate of return, this investment could yield close to $1 billion in economic activity to the region over the next 10 years. And finally, consistent with the resilient reserves priority in the letter of agreement, a restricted reserve is maintained to provide funding for the operations and program allocations, everything but the bonds, essentially, in times of economic downturn. A strategic reserve of $2 million is funded from existing reserves and will be used as necessary and only when necessary for special events or unique investment opportunities that yield an economic benefit to the community. And finally, the existing bond redemption reserve is converted to a general reserve to be used to fund the restricted reserve and the strategic reserve and as a backstop against economic fluctuations. With that, I'll turn it over to Ken to talk about oversight and governance.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Ken McGarr from the City Attorney's Office. In addition to these allocation changes, improvements are also made to fund oversight, and that was a key area of concern for the parties to the agreement. The amendments establish new triggers and a new process requiring the financial review team, which is made up of the chief financial officers from the city, metro, and the county, with the CFO of Travel Portland participating as a non-voting member to provide recommendations on the adequacy of the Visitors Facilities Trust account to meet all of its obligations and priorities. The VDFI board is empowered to make decisions on options to address potential funding shortfalls, and their decisions are subject to review by a dispute resolution committee. If one or more of the parties to the agreement do not concur with a VDFI board decision, the issue may be referred to dispute resolution. The dispute resolution committee is made up of the mayor, the county chair, and the metro president. The VDFI board may participate but does not have a vote on the dispute resolution committee. Key aspects in this enhanced system of checks and balances are: one, mandatory periodic reviews by the financial review team to get ahead of financial downturns. Two, flexibility through the process to adjust allocations according to a fixed menu of options in the event of a 5-year projection indicating insufficient funds. This gives the system the ability to better manage the impacts of an economic downturn resulting in reduced revenues for the system. And three, in an insufficient funding event, there is an automatic reset provision to year one allocation amounts in the event of a failure of either the VDFI board or the dispute resolution committee to take action. This provides additional protection to maintaining the ability of the system to make all bond payments during a recessionary environment. And with that, we're happy to answer any of your questions.
Commissioner Hardesty.
I want to thank you, gentlemen, for meeting with me yesterday and doing a speed 101 conversation. I want to applaud the mayor. I know when I first got here, this is something that has been kind of hanging around for quite some time. I want to, for the sake of the public record, raise some concerns that I raised with you gentlemen yesterday. That the city of Portland has had no conversations about renovating Memorial Coliseum, or we've talked a little about the P5, but only as it related to a roof. And so my concern continues to be that we are either obligating future city councilors to to development that they've had no say in. And of course, there has to be a vote of this body in order for that to happen. My second major concern is whether or not an independent audit has ever been done. We yearly get reports from Travel Portland telling us what a great job they do, but I've never seen a independent audit that actually said, is this the right investment? Clearly, people know where Portland is now, so we're spending more money on tourism rather than less, and I'd like to know why that would be. These are not questions I expect you to answer today. I know that you're at the beginning of a strategic planning process, but I want to be very clear. I don't want you to complete the strategic planning process and then tell us what you did. I'd like to be engaged and involved as you're developing that strategic plan so that it is consistent with the wishes of this city council. Thank you.
Good point, Saul. Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions? Very good. Do we have invited testimony, Tom?
There was from Chair Peterson, but
Very good.
We have not confirmed that, Mayor, sorry.
Yes?
We do.
Here she is. I see.
Metro President Lynn
Metro President.
Peterson
Just
is
when
here.
you thought nobody famous would show up, in walks Metro President Lynn Peterson. Come on up, Lynn. Thanks for being here. We appreciate it. Good morning.
Morning.
Good to see you.
It's good to see all of you. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. Thank you for having me here today. I just wanted to come and just reiterate what a great partnership we have had through this negotiations. It's very long negotiation. Our region is known as the go-to destination, and because of our great food, our quality of life, our mass transportation system, and stunning natural environment, all attract a lot of tourism. In 2018, visitors to Portland spent $5.3 billion, and the tourism industry employed more than 115,000 Oregonians. This did not happen by accident. Nearly 20 years ago, city, county, and metro leaders in partnership with tourism industry set up a groundbreaking system to invest tourism resources in the Portland destination. Through the Visitors Facilities IGA, we funded better convention, sports, and arts facilities, and we invested in promoting Portland across the country and worldwide. That investment has paid off in bringing people here and in supporting jobs at local hotels, restaurants, and other tourism-related businesses. With this visitor fund IGA agreement before you today, we want to renew and update our long-standing partnership to bolster that tourist economy and also fund programs that will move hard-to-serve homeless individuals into permanent housing. With 2 affordable housing bond measures approved over the past 3 years by the voters in the city of Portland and the metro region, we are working hard to acquire and build more affordable homes. I'm here to report that we have approved on an initial basis about 10% of what the voters had said that they wanted to build, the 3,900 units for 12,000 people. So by hopefully this spring, we will start to see some shovels in the ground on about 345 units to start towards that goal. So that's an exciting start to this program. A critical part of succeeding in the fight against chronic homelessness is identifying funding for permanent supportive housing, providing services and support once someone is housed. These new funds from taxes on tourists will be a welcome infusion of resources to match the city and metro affordable housing bond resources. We are at our best when we work in partnership to tackle tough issues. The investment of resources from tourism will not solve the homelessness challenge by itself. You guys have certainly made great strides just this week to moving cumulatively in a new direction, and I think that's awesome. But doing nothing is not an option in this case. Our city and region's voters understand we need to start and continue to move those cumulative impacts forward so we can actually get results. Tourism industry leaders are joining together with the leadership of the city, county, and metro to take a significant step forward, and I urge you to support this agreement. Thank you.
Thanks, President Peterson. We appreciate your being here. Thank you for your leadership and the leadership of the Metro staff. And I'd like to extend my thanks as well to Chair Kafori and her staff and the county staff, as well as the city staff that you saw sitting here, as well as Kristen Dennis from my office. It has been a long negotiation
Yes.
process, but I think it's been a really important one. And frankly, I think it has also helped us to better structure the leadership of the VDF. So thank you for everything.
As the
that
region
you've
grows
done.
and changes, so do we.
Absolutely. We evolve and we learn.
Thank you.
Any questions for President Peterson? Thank you for being here. We
Nice to
appreciate it.
see you.
Thank you. Carla, is there anybody signed up for public testimony?
No one signed up.
Very good. This is a first reading, Commissioner Fritz.
He already called for
I
public
just
testimony.
wanted to add my thanks to everybody who's been involved in these long negotiations. It's really important that we do update where this fund goes. Thank you to President Peterson as well as Mayor Wheeler and particularly Kristen Dennis on his staff for all the work, as well as the Chief Administrative Officer and also the City Attorney. While it's true that this particular council has not voted on whether to renovate Veterans Memorial Coliseum, councils under Mayor Adams and Mayor Hales have done so. The Veterans Memorial Coliseum has consistently turned a profit for the past several years and is the beloved home of the Winterhawks, as well as various other treasured community events. And so I'm very glad to see that this revision does continue to allocate money to do the renovations that has been the council direction for many years.
Very good. This is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading. Carla, we're moving to the regular agenda item number 1073, please.
$1073, extend the allowed temporary activity time frame for a mobility hub at Southeast 8th Avenue and Southeast Stark Street from an allowed 2 weeks and allowed limited new development until June 30, 2021.
Colleagues, we will now consider allowing a temporary mobility hub at Southeast 8th Avenue and Southeast Stark Street. Portlanders can enjoy a mobility hub with electric bicycles and scooters, electric wheelchair charging equipment, on-street electric car share parking stalls, and charging stations. There will also be outdoor smart furniture to charge phones and devices and public restrooms. The Mobility Hub helps us advance our climate action plan goals, helping take Portland into a clean energy future. Matt Wickstrom is here from BDS, the Bureau of Development Services, to present. There he is. Thanks for being here. Good morning.
Hi. I'm Matt Wickstrom with the Bureau of Development Services. I'm joined by Shanna Brownstein from Portland General Electric.
Thank you.
We're doing it old-fashioned today.
Tia, is there any way we could get more handouts for people who are in the chamber today?
I have more.
You do for people who are here? In case people
where's the
want to
rest,
follow
please?
along. Thank you, I appreciate it. And sorry about this, obviously, we had some technical difficulties this morning. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, that's fine. Okay, so we're here to talk about a temporary mobility hub today. It's on PGE-owned property at Southeast 8th and Southeast Stark. And the overall concept for the mobility hub is to integrate different modes of transportation, multimodal supportive infrastructure, and placemaking strategies to create activity centers and maximize first and last mile connectivity. I'll just go over the proposal, but Shanna's here to go into more detail and answer your questions after I'm done. The concept says for the mobility hub, as the mayor said, include electrified micro-mobility, such as electric scooters, EV smart car share, public transit, electric bicycle rental, and electric wheelchair charging. Some of the placemaking strategies that are included in the overall proposal would be smart furniture to charge devices, public Wi-Fi, a ballot drop box, an attended restroom, job training and charging infrastructure maintenance, and food carts. The site is at Southeast 8th and Southeast Stark. It's zoned IG1, that's General Industrial 1, and it's in the Central City Plan District, Central East Side Subdistrict. Zoning issues related to placing a mobility hub at this location include that the use would be categorized as a retail sales and service use. Retail is limited to 5,000 square feet of exterior activity area, so not just building area, but the overall site in the Central East Side subdistrict. The zoning code has allowances for temporary activities or pilot programs like this, but they're limited to 2 weeks. And this pilot program has a longer time frame. And also, permanent changes to the site would be required, and our temporary activities allowances don't allow permanent changes to be made. So those are just a couple things that we're coming with this ordinance today to correct, so this mobility hub could move forward. So overall, the ordinance really does two things with our temporary activity chapter. It extends the time frame that the temporary activity would be allowed to be there. In this case, it would extend it until June 30th, 2021. And then it also waives the prohibitions on the permanent changes being made, or waives the need for those permanent changes. So we're looking to extend the temporary activity allowance from 2 weeks to June 30th, 2021, but only for a mobility hub, not for any other retail sales and service type use. Waive the prohibition on new permanent development to allow 10,000 square feet of retail sales and service exterior activity area. Waive screening requirements for mechanical equipment and the garbage and recycling, so permanent changes don't have to be made to the site. And then finally, to request BPS to work with Bureau of Development Services and Portland Bureau of Transportation in future efforts to update city code, including Title 33, to address changing mobility needs. And that completes my presentation.
Very good.
I don't believe Shanna has any prepared remarks.
Okay, good.
So
Then I'll put a few more comments on the table. Thank you for the brevity and directness of the presentation. We appreciate it. The vision here really is multifaceted. Number one, we're trying to create an accessible public gathering space that is both consistent with the Smart City Technology program that we've undertaken as a council, and we are trying to meet our climate action goals. And again, we're thinking about accessibility and inclusion as we go about this process. This is also a key partnership with the private sector. PGE is heavily involved in the development of this first mobility hub. We'll call it a pilot. And we want to see how the public reacts to it, whether, how people use it, where they think that we need to improve upon the model or change the model. This is very much an innovation for the city of Portland, and I'm excited about it, and I appreciate the great work that you've put into it. Colleagues, any questions before we move to testimony? Please, Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you so much for your presentation. I agree, this sounds like an interesting project. However, I have a couple of questions. One is, we're making permanent changes for a pilot project in a section of the city where we're going to waive zoning requirements for this particular project. Am I correct in that understanding?
we're waiving the permanent changes. Permanent changes would be required, but we're waiving those permanent changes so they aren't required. In other words, no permanent changes would be, we're limiting.
So this pilot, if it disappears, everything would go with it?
Exactly. That's the kind of the essence of the temporary activities chapter, is that you can have the temporary activity, but you don't make it so it essentially becomes a permanent activity.
And how accessible will the restrooms and the charging stations and all that be to regular folks?
Thank you for the question. For the record, I'm Shauna Brownstein with Portland General Electric. Accessibility is really the focus of the project. And so the public restroom was an idea that came out of the mayor's office. And the idea there is really making that site accessible for the homeless and houseless population in the community. Another idea here is to provide public Wi-Fi that would be accessible to people in the community. Data show that everyone has smartphones, but not everyone has robust data plans to access e-bikes, car share, and scooters. And so having public Wi-Fi available there would enable everyone who has a smartphone to access those mode shares, whereas right now they would have to use their data if they're just accessing it off the street. So we've given a lot of thought to how we make this as accessible as possible. From where I'm sitting, I have a son who uses wheels to get around, and so I've been thinking a lot about how does the community that uses wheels to get around, wheelchairs, how do they access this site? And that's why I've thought a lot about wheelchair charging. People who use electric wheelchairs, getting stranded is a really big issue. And so really integrating that into how we think about transportation electrification has been a key issue for me as well.
So I agree with everything you said about, except when you talked about ride shares. Do we have any data that shows that houseless people who don't own automobiles actually use Lyft and Uber and those kind of?
Oh, I was thinking more about, I wasn't thinking about the homeless and houseless community there. I was thinking about the low-income community who are using public transit to get around and who come into the Central East Side District, perhaps for work or for tourism. I don't think we have data. I certainly don't have data on whether the houseless community uses Lyft and Uber to get around.
And there's an emergency clause on this because of a conference that's coming up. Tell me about that.
There's a conference coming up in June 2020 called the Worldwide Electric Vehicle Symposium. And it's a conference, it's a global conference around electric vehicles. And so there will be over 1,000 people in attendance for the conference. And the idea here is to think through what they experience when they come to Portland and how Portland shows up around transportation electrification. And so this would hopefully be a project that we would showcase, perhaps have a ribbon cutting for, at the conference, and think about how our community is integrating all of our different transportation needs and electrifying them as well.
And I just want to put a footnote on the conference. It's not just a conference on electric vehicles. It's actually one of the largest conferences in the world, and it was a great get for Portland to be able to host that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, and we appreciate all of PGE's leadership on this as well. Any further questions? Public testimony on this item, Carla?
No one signed up.
Very good. Call the roll.
Udaley?
This is an exciting project, and I'm especially pleased that it includes charging for power chairs. I share your experience of raising a kid that gets run on wheels, as well as public restrooms. To stop increasing carbon emissions from the transportation sector, we need to accelerate adoption of electric vehicles. Electric cars, e-bikes, and scooters all have roles to play in making that happen. But just like we adapted civic infrastructure to enable cars to become the dominant mode of transportation, we're going to have to adapt our infrastructure to enable and support electric vehicles. To meet our climate goals and make our city easier to navigate, we need this project to be successful, to learn from it and to replicate it at major transit hubs, commercial districts, and other community gathering places throughout the city. Our current code doesn't contemplate this type of use because it's new, so we need to continue to be flexible and creative to make this kind of innovation possible. And we need to ultimately change the code to make doing the right thing the easy thing to do. So thank you to BDS and to staff at PBOT, the Central East Side, and PGE for making this project possible. Please let my staff know how we can help as we move forward. I vote aye.
Fritz?
This is an exciting project, and thank you for all the careful thought that's gone into planning it and to making sure that the zoning code issues have been addressed in the manner that it has. I appreciate also that the ordinance directs the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability to work with Development Services and Transportation to see what's needed to update the code, as Commissioner Udaley just alluded to. Thank you also for a lot of the thinking about how to make sure that the porta potty is attended 24/7 to address some of the issues that we've seen on the Springwater Corridor and elsewhere, where probably housed people are unkind to people who are unhoused and vandalize the porta potties, which is So sad. I appreciate also that you thought about having a needle disposal and decided ultimately with the county's approval to not do that. But again, this is a pilot, so we can look at it. Thanks also for working with the Portland Police Bureau and the park rangers to learn from them about some of the challenges that we've had in these kinds of spaces. This is a great step forward. Thank you. Aye.
Hardesty?
I also look forward to seeing how usable this pilot project will be for all the needs in the East Side area where this pilot will take place. I'm hopeful that there will be opportunities to hire houseless people. I heard that the restroom facilities would be, there'd be staff that would be there. So, I mean, I hope that as we think about what this pilot could look like, that we truly integrate the community into that process. Look forward to seeing what comes out of this and what we learn that could be useful in the future. I'm normally reluctant to change code for special projects, but from what I've seen, that this has a promising opportunity to teach us something as we move forward. Clearly, we must change our transportation habits in a way that will get us to a greener future. So thank you very much, and I vote aye.
Wheeler?
I just love the innovative nature of this project, and we're going to learn a lot from it. My expectation is this first iteration will teach us a lot about what the second iteration should look like. So when people see this, when they use it, they should understand that this is in the spirit of innovation and trying to best deliver services to the public, but I'm sure we'll get lots of feedback, and that'll help refine future efforts. I thank the Bureau, Matt, all of your work and everyone else's work on this, and I thank PGE for once again stepping forward and helping us innovate and lead the efforts for the city of Portland. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted. Thank you both for your testimony. Next up, item 1074, please, on the regular agenda.
Authorize a $377,097 grant, or U.S. Department of Justice Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Community Grant Agreement, and appropriate $100,000 in law enforcement and criminal justice funds for fiscal year 2019-20.
Colleagues, on August 21st of this year, the city applied to the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, and the Bureau of Justice Assistance for the fiscal year 19 Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant Program. 1 month later, on September 21st, the DOJ awarded the fiscal year 19 Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistant Grant to the city in an amount of $377,097. Now, separate intergovernmental agreements will be executed with the city of Gresham and Multnomah County in order to obligate agency roles and responsibilities. The DOJ will reimburse the city for program expenses incurred by the Police Bureau and its joint applicants, the city of Gresham and Multnomah County. The grant period is October 1st, 2018 through September 30th of 2022. The council is declaring that an emergency exists because a delay would jeopardize the awarding of the grants from the Department of Justice. Bob Delghese is here with the Portland Police Fiscal Services to answer any questions that the council may have. And if there's anything else that I should have said that I didn't, please feel free to add it.
Well, my name is Bob Delghese, Portland Police Bureau. And to make sure that we captured all of the points, the mayor has identified most of them, with the amount and the period, the grant that we're looking at, and the intergovernmental agreements that will be executed based on this ordinance. The city of Portland is the designated fiscal agent, so the funds that are going to the county and to Gresham are passing through the city of Portland. If there are any questions I could answer?
Commissioner Hardesty?
Thank you, Mayor. You said that you did not say what the purpose of the grant funds would be used for?
Sure, I can walk through that. The city of Portland is going to spend 2/3 of the award that's dedicated to Portland on a pair of rapidly deployable explosive disposal robots. These are an important element of our tactical ability to do tactical response. They are, from my understanding, you can deploy them by hand. They only weigh 65 pounds.
You said originally that these would be reimbursable expenditures that
That's correct.
that the DOJ is paying for. So we're going to buy it, and then the DOJ is going to reimburse us for this equipment?
That's correct. Nearly 100% of the grants that the city receives are reimbursement grants. The award is given, the purpose area is identified and allowed by the grantor. We then submit receipts, essentially, that says this is what we purchased. They look at it, make sure that it conforms with what we said we were going to buy, and then the city gets paid. But that's true of almost all of the grants the city receives.
And is that the IGAs that are each of the other entities buying their own equipment, or is this equipment that will be utilized by these 3 jurisdictions?
Each of the other jurisdictions, Multnomah County and the city of Gresham, have their own designated award amounts, and they will be identifying, well, they've actually identified what they're going to spend those funds upon. They will, through us, request reimbursement. We will request that of the U.S. Department of Justice and then pass those funds back to those entities.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you. Public testimony on this item, Carla?
Yes, we have one person signed up,
Very good.
Maggie.
Come on up. Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Good morning.
Good morning. I first didn't know what this was about, but then it became clear to me. I saw an article in the paper about the Arizona man who sold the ammunition to the Las Vegas mass shooter. And not only did he have bullet-piercing bullets that he was making, but he also had bomb-making equipment. And so it's not surprising to me that they're coming here at this time to ask for this money. I just think it is so sad. I would employ a few bleepable words here that we have to do this in this day and age. It's unfortunately necessary. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Maggie. We appreciate it. Any further public testimony, Carla?
That's all who signed
Please
up.
call the roll.
Udaley,
Aye.
Fritz,
Thank you for your work. Aye.
Hardesty,
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. Ordinance is adopted. Next item, 1075, please.
Authorize 2 traffic enforcement grants totaling $50,811 from the State of Oregon's Traffic Safety Division 2020 grant programs for sworn personnel overtime, reimbursement, and authorize future Traffic Safety Division grant program agreements.
Colleagues, item 1075 is a request to accept 2 Oregon Department of Transportation Traffic Safety Division Traffic Enforcement Grant Awards. The 2 grants are for safety belt and speed enforcement and are annual grant programs for the Police Bureau's Traffic Division. The primary purpose of the Safety Belt Overtime Enforcement Grant Program is to maintain or increase local compliance with motor vehicle safety restraint laws. ODOT will award $25,811 for reimbursement of the project's activities. The Bureau will conduct safety belt overtime traffic enforcement during periods identified by ODOT as funds allow, as well as additional traffic enforcement coverage by the Portland Police Bureau. ODOT has also notified the city that it will award $25,000 for reimbursement of speed enforcement grant program activities. The goal of the program is to reduce the number and severity of motor vehicle crashes on local roadways with increased traffic safety in mind. The grant will focus on enforcement of speed laws in statistically identified problem areas. Captain Lorenko of the Portland Police Traffic Division is with us today to provide additional details regarding the grants. That's what my talking points say. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for having us here today. I'm Sergeant Ty Engstrom, Traffic Division.
You, Ty.
Thank you. And Lieutenant Stainbrook is here in Captain Lorenko's stead. She's out of town today.
Well, neither of you really look like Captain Lorenko. I was going to say the disguises aren't very good.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here, both of you.
Thank you very much. First of all, we would just like to say thank you to the council for your support. We recognize the support for the traffic division that you've put forth recently, and we really appreciate it. I think we're all on the same page here as we need to reduce the number of serious physical injury and fatal crashes. And as you're probably aware, we had 2 more earlier this week, bringing our total to 50 this year, which ties 2 years ago and is highest we've had in quite some time. So it's unfortunate, very unfortunate for those individuals and their families. But we thank you for your support. And as you mentioned, these 2 grants are for speed and seatbelt enforcement as their primary functions. Obviously, we are looking at other distracted or dangerous driving behaviors at the same time as well. Things aren't getting a blind eye or anything like that. But our primary focus when we go out on these grants is speed and safety belt enforcement, which play a large role in the serious injury and fatal crashes that we often respond to. The city has had these grants in place for several years, and it's a continuation of being able to do the work we currently do. And like what was said by Mr. Mayor, these are for overtime funds for officers to come in on their time off to help put added patrols out on the street during that time. We're here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Commissioner Hardesty?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just curious, how many hours of overtime does $25,000 buy?
Oh, boy.
If you don't know, it's okay.
I
You
don't
can
have
tell
the
me
number.
later.
I could try and do some math real quick, but
I won't hold you to the number. I was just curious. Is that like 10 officers?
well, you know what?
Are there somebody behind you with
This
an answer?
gentleman does probably have an answer. Right. It's about $75 an hour for officers, and it's a little bit more than that for sergeants, and then divided up amongst those amounts. Last year, I think we were given about $30,000 for a speed grant. I think we spent about $20,000 because we got it late in the year. And I want to say there was upwards of maybe, 80 or 90 total hours or something like that. That's
Thank
not
you.
exact.
Yeah, I won't quote you, I promise. Thank you. Appreciate you trying to answer that question.
Thank you.
Commissioner Udaly?
Mayor, thank you, Mayor. Well, this item is a great example of the ways in which PPB and PBOT could be working together. Since becoming the commissioner in charge of PBOT, I have struggled with the need for increased enforcement of our traffic laws and the disproportionate impact some of our enforcement strategies have historically created, particularly on communities of color. This is not my personal opinion. This is what the data shows us. I'm deeply concerned about the deaths that continue to occur on our streets and firmly believe that enforcement is as essential as education and improvements in our infrastructure that we're pursuing through Vision Zero to get us closer to our goal of eliminating traffic fatalities. Because of this, I've asked PBOT to dig into what the community is experiencing around enforcement and to use that information to inform recommendations about the best practices for equitable enforcement strategies. While this grant provides funds for needed speed enforcement, it does not address the fundamental concern I and many people have about how and where that enforcement will be targeted. In light of that, Mayor, I'd like to request that PPB and PBOT work together to identify the ways in which these grant funds will be spent that align with our Vision Zero values for equitable enforcement and enhance our working relationship toward better community outcomes and reduce traffic deaths.
So I think that's a great idea, Commissioner Udaly. And I know that over the years, the relationship between PBOT and PPB on some of the Vision Zero issues it's either been a good relationship or a less good relationship, depending upon who the personnel are and what their relationship is. But I would like to formalize that relationship. I think it's critically important that we have traffic enforcement and PBOT on the same page, because as you know better than anybody on this rostrum, It's about engineering, it's about education, and it's about enforcement. And I think there's broader ways for us to have our bureaus work together to be effective. Ty, you have a comment
Yes,
on this
Mr.
as
Mayor.
well? Yes, you bet.
Excellent point, Commissioner. Thank you very much for bringing that up. I took over Vision Zero related responsibilities for the traffic division about 3 years ago or so, when Sergeant Vopel retired. And about that same time, we started coordinating with PBOT to try and work on some of these issues. We wanted to have good communication amongst us, and we started having a monthly coordination meeting. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but I think it's second Tuesday of every month or something like that. We meet together and go over different talking points that have to do with the traffic division and safety on our roadways that involve both bureaus. So I think we're doing a pretty good job of working together on those points. As Mayor alluded, sometimes those relationships aren't as good, but right now we have a pretty good relationship, I think, with PBOT, and we work pretty well together. With regards to these two particular grants and the areas of enforcement within the grants, the seatbelt grant is wide open, citywide. Officers can go to where they see more of this type of behavior, or they have a good vantage point where they're looking directly into the driver's window or something like that. When it comes to the speed grant, which I have been the manager or the acting manager for the last few years, we try and focus on the high crash corridor streets that have been identified by ODOT, PBOT, as well as the traffic division. So sometimes that's a specific high crash corridor street like Division, or maybe it's just an area like Fessenden where we've had some bad crashes. And we have written the grant application in such a way that used to be very specific. You have to be on a high crash corridor. But we've written language into the grant that in the last couple of years, because I had concerns, I want to be able to work this in other places, that we can do it in other areas where we deem appropriate, whether it's because of fatals and other things. So really, it's wherever we're seeing those dangerous behaviors, and we can move around the area, and it doesn't have to necessarily be Division and Powell and Burnside way out in East Portland or something like that. It includes BHH and Barber and,
Okay.
yeah.
A couple follow-up questions. For the seatbelt enforcement side of this, was that grant specifically for seatbelts?
Seatbelt enforcement, child safety seats.
So it's not that we chose to focus on that, it's that that's what that grant was for?
That's what that grant's
Okay.
for. And the grant used to include other things, like they would put on classes on how to install safety seats for
Yeah.
children and stuff like that. Now it's mostly, its primary focus is seatbelt and child safety seat enforcement and education, as well as secondary is speed enforcement on that grant as well.
That makes sense. I did wonder why we would focus on seatbelt enforcement when we have a 98% compliance rate. And
You're right.
it's not wearing a seatbelt that causes an accident. It's speeding, it's impairment, it's distracted driving. So it would make more sense to me if officers had overtime to pull over people on their cell phones, for instance. But I
Right.
understand there are parameters of the grant that we have to function within. Yes, I'm glad to hear that you have been working with PBOT. I understand that at the outset of Vision Zero, there was a decision to de-emphasize enforcement due to these concerns around disparate impacts. Those concerns remain, but we are seeing a disparate impact, which is, for instance, pedestrians in East Portland are twice as likely to be killed walking down the street as elsewhere in the city. And so that's something that we need to carefully address, and I look forward to working more closely with the Bureau.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. Is there any public testimony on this item, Carla?
Yes, we have one person, Maggie.
Very good. Come on up. 2 minutes, please. Thanks, both of you. Appreciate it. Me too. I'm happy about it.
I'm looking forward to a time, Portland Homeless Town Hall. I'm looking forward to a time when pedestrians have more clout and more power to have some greater say. I'm looking for a reduction in cars. I'm looking for a time when scooter riders will come in and feel they're being discriminated against because they have to watch out for pedestrians. And and I think there's an education component and an enforcement component. And as far as the education component goes, I think we have laws going all the way back to the 16th century to our marine highway traffic laws that talk about who has the right of way. And when you are a big, huge, fast maneuverable vehicle, guess what? You don't have the right of way. The pedestrian has the right of way because they are the slow-moving, less maneuverable vehicle that is more vulnerable. And that goes all the way back to the 16th century. So I would like to see kids get scooter, rider education, not just about wearing their helmet or not just about wearing your seatbelt, but to learn how to move in this world where they're going to have to watch out for pedestrians. And if you have a guy with cerebral palsy or a paraplegic who's in his wheelchair and he's doing 20, 25 miles an hour and he runs over a little old lady, man, he's got to be cited and get a ticket. Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Is that a non-emergency?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
It's a non-emergency ordinance.
No, it's an emergency ordinance according to mine.
I don't have a star.
I move that we add an emergency clause.
Carl,
For the
what's
purpose of
on the
getting the grants as
notification?
quickly as possible.
I've got 1075,
The ordinance
correct?
No, we're on 1074.
Oh,
No, we did that.
No.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
I stand corrected.
Oh, you're right.
Okay, so we have a motion from Commissioner Fritz. And we have
And
a
it's for the
second.
purpose of getting the grant because we heard that
Perfect.
last year they were not able to
I
get
apologize, I was
it
on the
as
wrong
quickly.
line. Please call the roll.
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
Thank you for your work on this. Aye.
Hardesty? William?
Thank you for
Wheeler.
the presentation. I appreciate it. Thanks for answering our questions. Commissioner Daly, I also want to thank you for raising the issue of coordination between bureaus, and I was glad to hear Sergeant Engstrom talk about the relationships that have already been developed with PBOT, and I think there's always more we can do to coordinate those efforts, and that includes with our citizen advisory committees. So I appreciate that
Thank you, Mayor.
gesture. I vote aye. The grant's approved. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here
That was
today.
the
That was
vote on
the
the
motion.
amendment.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry it was. Yeah, thank you. Main motion, as amended.
Udaley?
Thank you for your work. Yeah.
It's going to be okay.
It's Wednesday.
Like I said, I look forward to working together with PBOT and PPB. I vote aye.
Fritz?
Obviously, a team effort to get through this agenda. Aye.
Hardesty?
Thank you so much for being here today. I'm hopeful that as PBOT and Portland Police continue to build their relationship, that somebody will mention that you can't actually read the street signs at night, which I think actually contributes to the frustration of people trying to figure out where they're going. All these pieces have to work together, and it's important that people are safe in our community. I vote aye.
Wheeler?
Well, I think I'm a living example of the perils of multitasking, but that is just the nature of the beast. So thank you, colleagues, for your forbearance and also the humor. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted as amended. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. I appreciate it. Thanks for your good work. Next item, 1076.
Assess properties for sidewalk, curb, and/or driveway repair for the Portland Bureau of Transportation.
Colleagues, this non-emergency first reading of an ordinance is a routine internal city business process to assess property owners for sidewalk repair charges. It's too soon for me. This is near and dear to my heart. In this legislation, there are a total of 182 properties and $408,632.17 to be assessed. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Sharon Matias from the Revenue Division.
Lee Munson from PBOT.
This ordinance is for sidewalk repair on property that is required by the city. Any remonstrances have been pulled from this assessment and are not in this ordinance.
Very good. Any questions, colleagues? Public testimony on this item?
Yes, we have two people signed up, Scott Melville and Maggie.
Very good. Come on up. Stay close. We might need some clarification. Maggie's taking a pass. Is Scott here? Scott Melville. Very good. This is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading. Next item, 1077, is a second reading.
Amend Revenue and Finance Code to streamline the procurement and contracting process.
Colleagues, this is a second reading. We've already heard a presentation and public testimony on this item. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Carla, please call the roll.
Udaly?
Aye.
Fritz?
I greatly appreciate the work of Lester Spittler, the Chief Procurement Officer, and there are some good changes in these amendments. For instance, creating a process for approving unsolicited proposals, allowing bureaus to contract directly with minority and disadvantaged certified firms for up to $150,000 for goods and services and to $1 million for the pre-qualification, and also removing the procurement office from the intergovernmental agreement process. However, I have serious reservations about three of the proposed changes. Allowing bureau directors to award grants up to $15,000, up from $5,000. It was said that this was due to inflation. However, adjustment for inflation since 2010 would be $5,887, not $15,000. And I think this allowing bureau directors to give unlimited grants of $15,000 without public review is a serious mistake. It also allows bureau directors to approve intergovernmental agreements up to $100,000, thereby binding the city to agreements without the consent of the council. And it increases the authority of the bureaus with commissioner in charge sign-off to approve emergency contracts up to $500,000 without requiring council review and approval, therefore having no ability to look at what the minority and disadvantaged and women businesses have been awarded in those contracts. So for these reasons, unfortunately, I have to vote no.
Hardesty?
While I think some of these changes are necessary and have been in the making for a very long time, I share some of the concerns that Commissioner Fritz raised, but I am concerned that raising the limit from $250,000 for co-bid contractors to $1 million, I'm told, creates more opportunity. However, no company goes from being a $250,000 company to $1 million company without some supports built in. And we have not done a good job of actually contracting with minorities and women at the $250,000 rate. And so I am reluctant to support a plan that would pretend that somehow we're going from 250 to 1 million when we have not effectively done the 250,000 role. Therefore, I will also be voting no.
Wheeler?
So, colleagues, I'm hearing your concerns and your criticisms on this particular item, and I think we had some really good conversations. I think some very valid questions were raised. I want to respect the work that the Office of Management and Finance has put into this. I think they've come a long way on this. So I will vote no on this so that the item fails, and then I will ask for a motion for reconsideration.
Move to reconsider.
We have a motion and a second. Colleagues, what I'd like to do is withdraw this for now. I'd like to bring it back to my office, and let's keep working on it with your approval. Very good. So we are pulling this item back, Carla.
Do we have to vote on the motion to reconsider?
I don't know. Legal counsel?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, could you please call the roll, Carla, on the motion to reconsider?
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Hardesty? Wheeler?
Aye. So the item is being reconsidered. It's pulled back to office for further review. Thank you, colleagues.
I appreciate that.
We are now in a position where we can go back to the time certain items. Carla, could you please call item 1060?
Proclaim the year 2019 to be the 150th anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad.
Colleagues, in 1869, America celebrated the inauguration of the first transcontinental railroad. It was a major milestone in our evolution as a nation. But lost in the celebration then, and for decades, and even a century afterwards, were the many courageous workers who sacrificed their all to make it happen. Those workers included thousands of immigrants from around the world, Chinese, as well as Native Americans and African Americans who worked on some of the most treacherous stretches of the railroad. Often they were paid less than other workers, and they were also often chastised, discriminated against, and mistreated. And after the work was done, to add insult to injury, their contributions were largely forgotten. As we celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad, I want to take a moment to also acknowledge the contributions of Chinese immigrant labor who are often underpaid and unrecognized for their work. To be clear, the Transcontinental Railroad would not have come to fruition without Chinese immigrants. 150 years later, we're long overdue in shining a light on the good that was done by all the railroad workers, including those who have been excluded from history. It's time to recognize and honor their enduring and historic achievements and contributions. And I want to thank Helen Ying for bringing this resolution or this proclamation forward. And with that, I will now turn it over to Helen Ying, the National Executive Vice President and Portland Lodge Board Director of CACA, Gloria Lee, who's a Portland Board member, Neil Lee, the Oregon Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association President, and Duncan Wong, Apano Associate Director. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your hard work on this important proclamation.
Excuse me, sir, could you please turn the light off your phone? It's really bright in our eyes. Thank you.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Commissioner Hardesty, Commissioner Fritz, and Commissioner Daly for this opportunity for us to come before you this morning. So I understand the projector is not working. Unfortunately. So I think you have the slides before you, and I'm going to present the presentation as if I did have the projector working, and I'm going to just say this is slide 2, so you could just follow me along, right?
Good. Thank you, Helen.
Yeah, and for the people in the room, I believe we have copies, hard copies that are made. They're at the table by the door, so if you would like a copy, please go ahead and grab one.
Yeah, and
So-
Helen, we apologize. What happened was there was a problem with our monitors up here. So this morning, we had a contractor in to fix the monitors. They fixed the monitors, but in the process of fixing our monitors, they somehow managed to discombobulate the overhead projector. So Murphy has injected himself into our hearing a little bit, but thank you for your patience.
And I want to just share with everyone in the room, the slide presentation is really marvelous. I'm happy to, share copies with you all if you would like it.
And we'll make sure it gets onto the record and onto the website as well.
That would be great.
Yes,
That would be
thank
great.
you.
So beginning with slide 2, on May 10, 1869, the last spike of the Transcontinental Railroad was ceremoniously driven in at Promontory Summit, Utah, joining the Central Pacific Railroad and the Union Pacific Railroads to form one continuous railroad to connecting the east to the west. It was a nationwide celebration, right as a last golden spike was hammered in place, announcement of the railroad's completion went out via telegram. A trip across country to California, which once took 6 months, now only took 3.5 days. Next slide. But many of the workers who had built the railroad were all but invisible at the ceremony. And its retelling for many years afterward, they included about 15,000 to 20,000 Chinese immigrants, up to 90% of the workforce on the Central Pacific Line, who were openly discriminated against, vilified, and forgotten. Next slide. Looking back, historians say the Chinese who began arriving in the United States in significant numbers during the California Gold Rush of 1848 to 1855 were deemed too weak for the dangerous, strenuous job of building the railroad east from California. Hilton Obenzinger, Associate Director of the Chinese Railroad Workers in North America Project at Stanford University, says that Central Pacific Railroad Director Charles Crocker recommended hiring Chinese workers after a job ad resulted in only a few hundred responses from white laborers. He says white workers, whom the company wanted, did not sign on in numbers anything close to what was needed. Next slide. The western half of the tracks consists of the most treacherous, steep, and dangerous terrain. Those workers pounded on solid rock from sunrise to sunset, hung off steep mountain cliffs in woven reed baskets, and withstood the harshest winters on record in the Sierra Nevada. They were paid less than white workers, and hundreds lost their lives as a result of the dangerous work. Next slide. Their job duties included everything from unskilled labor to blacksmithing, tunneling, and carpentry. According to the project, with most work done with hand tools. They also had the most difficult and dangerous work, including tunneling and the use of explosives. There's also evidence they faced physical abuse at times from supervisors. They protested these and the long hours, and they used their collective strength to challenge the company. Next slide. They toiled through back-breaking labor during both frigid winters and blazing summers. Next slide. Hundreds died from explosions, landslides, accidents, and disease. And even though they made major contributions to the contribution of the Transcontinental Railroad, these 15,000 to 20,000 Chinese immigrants have largely been ignored by history. Next slide. In fall 1865, Chinese workers began building 15 tunnels, most of them at high elevations through the Sierra Nevada for a total of 6,213 feet. Next slide. The most difficult tunnel was number 6, the Summit Tunnel. Winters were especially dangerous. Avalanches would sweep away camps of Chinese workers, carrying them, many to their death. Next slide. 20 workers died in one avalanche, and individuals disappeared in smaller snow slides. Some frozen bodies were found in the spring, and their shovels or picks still in their hands. Next slide. On April 28, 1869, 10 miles and 56 feet of track was laid in one day. The accomplishment was in response to $10,000 wager Charles Crocker made with Thomas Durant of the Union Pacific that his workers were capable of doing what seemed impossible. A squad of 8 Irish rail handlers and a small army of 5,000 workers, mostly Chinese, accomplished the feat. The names of the 8 Irish workers were recorded by the railroad, and they were hailed in a parade in Sacramento. None of the Chinese workers' names were recorded. They remain nameless. Next slide. Leland Stanford, president of Central Pacific, former California governor, and founder of Stanford University, told Congress in 1865 that the majority of the railroad labor force were Chinese. Without them, he said, It would be impossible to complete the western portion of this great nation enterprise within the time required by the Act of Congress. Next slide. Who else but Americans could have laid 10 miles of tracks in 12 hours? John A. Volpe famously asked. And who else but Americans could chisel through miles of solid granite? Who else but Americans could have drilled 10 tunnels in mountains 30 feet deep in snow? In fact, it was Chinese and Irish workers who achieved that feat. In the years that followed, the Chinese workers would face rising anti-immigrant sentiment and violence and would be barred from citizenship by the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. Next slide. Connie Young Yu has told her story many times before, but on May 10, 2019, invited by the state of Utah and the National Park Service, she stood on stage in front of 20,000 people gathered for a triumphant celebration and opened the day's ceremonies by saying, "My great-grandfather, Li Wangsang, was one of the thousands of unsung heroes building the railroad across the Sierra Nevada mountains, laying tracks through to Utah, uniting the country by rail. Many descendants of Chinese railroad workers are here today. This is a far cry from 50 years ago. My mother, Mary Lee Young, was the only such descendant present then." Yet, why were the Chinese denied their rightful place in history at the 100th anniversary? Why was Philip Choi, president of the Chinese Historical Society of America, kept from making a presentation on the official program? The contribution of the Chinese to the Transcontinental Railroad was kept from national memory. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 stopped the immigration of Chinese laborers and denied all Chinese naturalization to U.S. citizenship. In effect, for 61 years, the law excluded Chinese from American history. And the reason why that these Chinese were excluded on that day of the celebrations because John Wayne showed up, and he was given the mic instead. Next slide. Connie Young Yu says that when her parents joined a delegation of fellow Chinese Americans attending a 1969 event commemorating the centennial of the first U.S. Transcontinental Railroad, they were snubbed upstage by Hollywood star John Wayne. Last slide. Now, 50 years later, she and others descendants from Chinese immigrants who built much of the cross-country rail line are looking forward to the 150th Golden Spike anniversary in Utah. For rightful recognition, they said, is so long overdue. This project is a cornerstone of the Chinese American history. Thank you, and I would like to, there's actually a few slides that I added for Gloria, and the first one says, "A generation which ignores history has no past and no future," and Gloria will take it from here.
Good morning. I'm Gloria Lee. I'm a volunteer board member with the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, among many things. I found this quote, and I really am a lover of science fiction. And Robert Heinlein wrote A Stranger in a Strange Land. His quote was, "A generation which ignores history has no past and no future." And that's why we're here today. There's a bit of irony in using his quote, as Heinlein, as many of you probably have read, because you're my age, read Stranger in a Strange Land, which is a fictional story that focuses on a human that is on Mars, raised by Martians, and his adaptation to understanding earthly humans and their culture on Earth. So might there be similarities to what our Chinese ancestors experienced upon arrival in America? The contributions of the Chinese in America have long been ignored and diminished. And I know people can't see the slides, but it's interesting that it is very hard to find pictures of any of the Chinese that worked on the Transcontinental Railroad because no pictures were taken of them. Now, they were ignored due to not just racial discrimination, but fear, differences, jealousy, and a really human attempt to protect that which you know and that which you grew up with and discard what is foreign. And so the Chinese working on the railroad lived separately, ate separately, and were paid the lowest wages of any of the workers. I am a first-generation Chinese American. That's the epitome of the melting pot assimilation. And we still practice those tenets today, although we have all the DEI going on in this city. We still practice melting pot tenets because there's a proclivity to label Chinese as all the same based on appearance. And if I had a nickel for everyone that's ever asked me if I speak Chinese, I would be very, very wealthy today. So bear with me a minute while I run through this and why. One does not just speak Chinese or write Chinese. There are 7 main dialects with likely another 200 subdialects. In Portland, the main dialects are Cantonese and Mandarin. There are 2 written languages, traditional and simplified. The difference between Cantonese and Mandarin is the difference between French and English. The Chinese who labored and toiled building the infrastructure of the transportation system for America came from the Pearl River Delta of Guangdong, which used to be called Canton, which is where my mother's from. The language is Toisan, a dialect of Cantonese. The written language is traditional characters that's still used today in Hong Kong and Taiwan. The language of the descendants of the railroad workers is Cantonese and likely Toisanwa. The written language is traditional Chinese. Today in Portland, younger generation Chinese speak Mandarin and write simplified Chinese, which came into existence approximately 50s and 60s. So it is critical and important to the cultural history of the Chinese in America that our new Chinese generations and Chinese Americans recognize the contributions of their forebears in the making of America. Until Chinese and Chinese Americans in America have a place in the social studies curriculums of our public schools, a lot of this will be lost to future generations of Chinese and Chinese Americans. A generation which ignores history has no past and no future. I think Helen spoke about 50 years ago, which is recently, on May 10th, 1969, the 100th anniversary of the completion of America's first transcontinental railroad was celebrated in Promontory, Utah. Previous to that celebration, Centennial officials had agreed to set aside 5 minutes for the Chinese Historical Society to pay homage to the Chinese workers, of which there were up between 15,000 to 20,000 who had helped build the railroad. Many had gathered in Promontory, Utah that day. They had hoped that this would be the moment where the Chinese who labored on the railroads would be recognized, because virtually, as I said, there were not a lot of photographs and not a lot of said. What I didn't learn until just right now, that it was John Wayne who interrupted the celebration. They never got a chance to speak. The 5 minutes that they were promised never happened. Transportation Secretary at that time was John Volpe, who did speak. He made no reference to the Chinese immigrants who made up 90% of the Central Pacific Railroad and performed some of the most deadly work at lower wages than the white laborers. They also had to seek their own food and shelter. Many of them slept in the tunnels that they were working on, but they were ineligible to become naturalized citizens under federal law. Our hope is that during this 150th anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad, the story of the up to 20,000 Chinese railroad workers will be told. Ghosts can be laid to rest, and future generations can stand proud and be counted. We are made by the history of our ancestors. Unlike the recognition of the Chinese railroad workers who have all passed, we have a really small window of opportunity to honor, recognize, and present the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor to Chinese and Chinese Americans who served during World War II. There's a slide, sorry. And I think, yeah, that slide was recent. Although many of the 20,000 are now in their 90s, 95, some are still living, and we're seeking to reach all veterans and their families. Our history is part of America. The Chinese American Citizens Alliance got its beginnings in 1895 as the Native Sons of the Golden State, that being in San Francisco, California. And this was done in response to racism and prejudice that limited not just employment and education, but housing, insurance, and banking opportunities. In 1915, the name Chinese American Citizens Alliance was adopted as more states came in. We are now 19 lodges across the United States, and the Portland Lodge will be celebrating its 100th anniversary in 2021 with the theme Generations Together. Please join us, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
So next we have Neil Lee, CCBA President, to share with you some of his thoughts.
Excellent. Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning. Okay, good morning, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners Udaley, Fritz, Hardesty, and Mr. Fish, who is not present today, but I want to recognize his ongoing support for the Chinese community. My name is Neil Lee. I am president of the Oregon Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association and the Portland Lees Association. I'm also an architect, and I operate one of only 3 Chinese American-owned architectural firms in Portland. You probably have seen me on the Broadway Corridor Steering Committee, and I'm a longtime volunteer reviewer of the City of Portland's Minority Evaluator Program. My great-grandfather came to America in the late 1800s. He found his way to Portland, where he opened a successful Chinese grocery store in Old Town Chinatown. I am the first generation in my family to be born and raised in Portland. So what does this proclamation mean to me? Well, reliving the stories of the Chinese working on the railroad was very inspiring to me. In fact, one day, while I was designing the South Waterfront Station on the Portland-Milwaukee Light Rail project, it occurred to me that the Chinese Americans are still working on the railroads. What a profound connection. I had the fortunate opportunity to help connect 2 cities, but my ancestors before me worked very hard and braved many dangers and hurdles to connect a nation. Today's proclamation affirms that our Chinese community was and is a prominent contributor to the development of our railroads, our cities, and our nation. So why is it important to continue to commemorate this event in history? The United States was built by all walks of life and all types of people from different cultures and backgrounds. We need to continue to tell the story from we the people, all the people, to tell a complete and robust story of our history. We need to remember what we did in the past so we can all do better and be proud of what we are doing today and in the future. It is my belief that inclusiveness is a valuable asset. Working together collaboratively with different views and opinions from different cultures and walks of life can bring more understanding and better outcomes. Let this proclamation be a reminder to us of all the great things we are capable of doing together, to be inclusive and to give recognition to all those who contribute, big and small, to the betterment of our community and nation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next we have Duncan to share with us. Go ahead and introduce yourself to me.
Thank you. This is Duncan Huang from Apano. Thanks for having me, Mayor Wheeler and commissioners. On the 150th anniversary of a transcontinental railroad, I am struck by how many similarities there are to so many immigrant stories you hear today, including my own family's. At the start of 1849, there were only 55 Chinese men living in the US. Then, due to the California gold rush, over 150,000 Chinese came over to find work and try to make their fortunes. A series of wars, floods, and famine had made earning a livelihood in China extremely difficult. At the height of colonialism, China was militarily defeated by the British in the Opium War of the 1840s, and southeastern China was in ruins caused by the Taiping Rebellion. Many Chinese immigrants then crossed the Pacific, a very difficult 3-week journey for which they could barely afford steerage class. They came to this country for opportunities for a better life for themselves and their families. So for the past 170 years, Chinese have been coming to this country for many of the same reasons. Today, there are over 2.5 million Chinese Americans living in the United States. And today, we honor the story of some 20,000 Chinese railroad workers for their hard work and sacrifice. This is an important and necessary milestone. However, a proclamation is only the first step. I'm also deeply interested in how we've grown as a nation over the past nearly 2 centuries, and I can think of a number of next steps. First, the story needs to be a part of our educational system, and is a reason why ethnic studies curriculums are so important. This is a story about my community's early experience in America, and it's also a story that we see repeated nearly every day in the news. People from around the world, from China to South America, are still making the same difficult decision to uproot themselves from untenable situations and travel thousands of miles to this country. We are locked in a constant debate as to whether immigrants are valued contributing members of our social fabric, or they're here to take jobs or commit crimes. That's why it is so important to recognize the contributions and sacrifices of immigrant communities throughout our history. It's part of a narrative we're trying to build. Second, it is extremely valuable today to invest more deeply in civic engagement and civic empowerment to continue to bring new voices to the table. When my parents moved to this country, they started the first Chinese restaurant in Upper Michigan. They couldn't vote, and showing up at City Hall to talk to elected officials was not something that entered the realm of possibility. While my mom worked, I was often in the back, eating free food and doing homework. They worked, yeah, it's a common story. They worked so hard so I could go to law school and then become a community advocate. Today, in our work in the J District, I can walk into almost any of the restaurants and see that same kid in the back doing homework, and their parents are working hard. So these are important voices the city needs to keep hearing from. Finally, I would encourage us to continue into actions that would help Portland become a safe, welcoming space where immigrants can thrive through a lens of past inequity and racism. I want to thank Council for a number of things. I want to thank you for investing in Portland United Against Hate so we can address hate crimes within our community. I want to thank you for supporting initiatives like the Inclusive Business Resource Network so that people of color entrepreneurs have a best chance to be successful in creating small businesses and thriving. And I want to thank you for supporting initiatives in the J District. Roughly 25% of Portland's Asian American community lives in this one neighborhood. So thank you for the investments in affordable housing, community health clinics, safety improvements, and economic empowerment. So it is up to us now to reflect and honor upon the lessons of the past and create the conditions of the future where we no longer have to recognize great accomplishments made despite the most inequitable and unjust circumstances. We should no longer have to work in the shadows of history. So thank you so much for this opportunity to highlight this important contribution of Chinese American, and let's continue to forge ahead for our community today. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan, and thank you, Gloria and Neo. I just want to close with a quote from James Baldwin, Mayor and Commissioners. It reads, "History is not the past. It is the present." We carry our history with us. We are our history.
So before I read the proclamation, first of all, I want to thank you all for this presentation. It was heartfelt, it was provocative, and it was informative. And Helen, I want to thank you in particular. We've had some conversations about this proclamation. You helped illustrate the history behind the history, if you will. And I'm glad that people in this city have the opportunity to hear the panel's conversation today. I think it was outstanding. And I thank you for being here. Before I read the proclamation, I'll entertain any comments my colleagues have. Commissioner Daly?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank you for bringing this item to us today. When I saw we were set to recognize this anniversary flags went up for me, because we can't continue to recognize and celebrate historic events and figures without addressing the real history, the problematic history, and the past harms that have been done to communities, especially communities of color. I have significantly edited my remarks because I don't need to preach to the choir, and also you're here to teach us. I don't need to teach you anything about this history, but I do think that I'd like to put a few remarks on the record. Despite how instrumental Chinese workers were in constructing the Transcontinental Railroad, our society repaid their labor and their sacrifice by nearly writing them out of history. Chinese workers were subject to prejudice, discrimination, and inhumane treatment. Central Pacific offered higher pay, meals, and shelter to white workers, while Chinese laborers were paid less and expected to feed and shelter themselves. Due to this policy, Chinese workers often had to live in the unstable tunnels they were constructing. It makes me want to cry, too. And more than 1,000 workers died in accidents and avalanches. This type of revisionist history is all too familiar to our immigrant communities, and sadly, the prejudice, discrimination, and inhumanity persists today, 150 years later. This is why we need to do better as a city and a country, not just to recognize and celebrate the contributions of our immigrant communities, but to stand with them and defend them, and especially in these particularly difficult times. So thank you very much for bringing this to us, for being here today, and for sharing your stories.
Thank you, Commissioner Fritz.
Thank you for your leadership in our community. Thank you for teaching us over many years. Thank you for teaching me over the 11 years that I've been on the council. Thank you, Helen, for your leadership as well. I'm awed by the presentation. It was really moving and taught me a lot that I didn't know. I'm really sad about this, both happy and sad about the Congressional Gold Medal. It says Mr. Fred Lee was presented with a framed copy of the confirmation letter from the Chinese-American World War II Veterans Recognition Project to inform him that of his eligibility to receive the Congressional Gold Medal was confirmed. The Congressional Gold Medal will not be presented until the Speaker of the House officially holds the Congressional Gold Medal award ceremony in Capitol Hill in 2020. How long do they think that they can just delay doing this? I mean, for heaven's sakes, if there was a time to waive the protocol and do it earlier, they should be doing it every time they find somebody who's eligible. On behalf of politicians there, I apologize. That's not right. It's just not right. And if it was here, we'd be doing it today. And I appreciated the representative from Mapano noting that the city has tried to put our money where our mouths are. And we are going to do the proclamation, but we have been supporting Portland United Against Hate. We supported Apano with the construction of the new building and with the Jade District. And so that's good for all of us. And it's not only the Chinese American community that benefits, it's good for all of us, because when you thrive, we thrive, and vice versa. It should be the case. Thank you so much for being here.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you all for such a compelling presentation. It is hard to be in a room with Helen and not learn something new. And I've known Helen for a long time, and yet she continues to teach me very lovingly, very kindly, but very, very intentionally. And I thank you for the years of your service in doing that. I have toured the Chinese Museum in Seattle that tells this story very eloquently, with all the warts and all the challenges that come with telling an honest story of our history. The African American community and the Chinese community share so much when it comes to the history of how acceptance has happened in the United States of America. And in spite of others' best efforts, we continue to thrive, we continue to raise families and start businesses and are productive, contributing members of the community. You have the added burden of being the model minority, right? Because heaven forbid a Chinese person would need any help from anybody, right? And so you have that extra burden that you carry because it's hard for people to see the lack of investments that have been made. I am so happy that we do this periodically because we learn so much about the hidden history. And one of you said, if this is not part of the education curriculum, then we lose an opportunity to actually educate the next generation of Oregonians, right? We can prevent some of the mistakes of the past if people actually understand the past, right? And I'm going to steal this quote that you used, Helen. A generation that ignores its history has no past and no future. That really touched my heart because it's absolutely true. If you don't know your history, then basically what you're doing is erasing some core parts of your being. So I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you for the kindness in which you are very intentional about sharing the history with all the wards, and know that we strive to be better, much, much better than we were, regardless of what's happening at the national level. It's just craziness happening there, right? But that's not who we are. Not as Oregonians, that's not who we want to be, and that's not who we want to be for the future. So I greatly appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's now my honor to read this proclamation on behalf of the Portland City Council. Whereas the advent of the railroad in the 1820s, many Americans held a vision of binding together the nation through the construction of a railroad across the nation from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And whereas building the first major national transportation infrastructure necessitated the employment of thousands of workers, many Chinese and Irish immigrants, Mormons, Native Americans, African Americans, and many others who joined to work together to construct the railroad. And whereas those thousands of workers often went unacknowledged for their hard work and sacrifice, so we honor them here today. And whereas United States industrialists recruited thousands of Chinese workers to assist in the construction of the railroad, making up 80% of the Western workforce, were paid substandard wages and faced grueling hours in hard conditions in order to lay hundreds of miles of track. And whereas, because of their hard work and the hard work of others who have not been historically recognized, the impact of the Transcontinental Railroad in the 19th century has been likened to the impact of modernization in the 21st century, transforming communications, commerce, and industry, facilitating the movement of people across the country, and increasing the global presence and significance of the United States of America. And whereas we recognize the 150th anniversary, the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, and celebrate the tireless efforts of the Chinese immigrants and all of those who overcame brutal obstacles, both natural and technological, to achieve the goal of uniting the country from coast to coast. Now, therefore, I, Ted Wheeler, Mayor of the City of Portland, Oregon, the City of Roses, do hereby proclaim November 20th, 2019 to be the 150th anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in Portland, and encourage all residents to observe this day. Thank you. Thank you, Helen. So, could we get a photograph down here in front?
Could I invite our guests?
Invite whoever you'd like.
Yes, please come and join us. go back here? Okay.
Can everybody back here?
Thank you again for all your work. Thank you so much.
I squeeze in and act like we like each other. Nice and tight. Let's get the short people up front. You know who you are.
We get to go angle.
Howdy, howdy.
Shoulders. I kind of angle in here.
All right.
Angle in.
Hi, welcome. Thanks for being here. Good to see you. Okay. I think this is as tight as we're gonna get. Squeeze. Squeeze. No, we're always.
Who are we looking at? All right. All right, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, thank you. Good to see you.
Hi, good, how are you? Thank you for being here. Good to see you. Thank you so much. Really wonderful job. Oh my goodness. A little bit.
Okay. Nice to see you. Thank you.
Man, for a little one, you got a loud voice.
He's going to be an operator.
That baby's got a lot of hair.
Yeah. Henry had like basically a pompadour when he was born. A pompadour, pretty much. Yeah.
No,
I'm gonna see
we
if
don't.
I-
There are city archives, but there's,
My sister was born since she was 3.
Oh.
She'd been my first one, and I've been having tests yin yang breast because I was like, I should grow.
Let's see. I don't know if I have little baby photos on here. Maybe not. Oh, there's one of my favorites. He's dressed up like Harry Potter.
That is a
for
good one.
School day.
Very nice picture.
Yeah, maybe I don't have baby photos.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, boy,
He looked like, he kind of looked like Elvis.
yeah.
Darn, I wish I had, well, you know, it's Facebook. He didn't have Facebook till he was several years old. So.
I'm impressed you got all these old pictures on your phone.
There he's, Lord of the Rings.
Oh, okay.
He had a little gold ring.
Uh-huh. Nice.
Oh, this is Facebook. They're all on Facebook,
I see.
yeah. Yeah, no, I've had so many phones. I held out on the cell phone, didn't have a cell phone until our first trip, road trip with Henry, and I just thought, if we break down and we don't have a cell phone, I'm gonna feel like a terrible mother, so.
Yeah.
But I did hold out. Okay, where are we?
good idea. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
This is your card, yes? Oh, it's my wife's card. It's your wife, okay. She'll let you know. Yeah, she will.
All right.
All right, thanks for being here. We sure appreciate it.
Go up that other way over there.
All right, items 1061 and 1062. Could you read those together, please, Carla?
Update bicycle parking regulations and amend fee schedule for land use services. 1062, establish standards for bicycle parking for certain city-funded affordable housing projects designed but not yet permitted.
All right, so we're here today to follow up on the bicycle parking code update project. This project amends Title 33. As a reminder, last week, we forwarded a number of amendments to the bicycle parking code update project. These amendments are outlined in the memo provided by staff. Today, the plan is to vote on those amendments, and then next week will be the second reading of the two ordinances and the final vote. First, a housekeeping item. As a reminder, we closed the oral testimony last week, as you'll recall, but we allowed the written record to remain open for people to provide testimony on the public hearing and the amendments that were forwarded last week. However, I'm now closing the record before we vote on the amendments. So this is the official notification that the record is officially closed. Before we recap these known amendments, have a discussion and a vote, do any of my colleagues have any additional amendments that they'd like to introduce at this particular time? I don't see any. So I'd now like to bring up both Portland Bureau of Transportation and Bureau of Planning and Sustainability staff to help walk us through the amendments and the votes. Good morning.
Good morning. Awesome. So yeah, we can just do quick introductions. I'm Liz Horman from the Bureau of Transportation.
Could you move the mic a little closer?
Great. Sarah Figliozzi, also with Portland Bureau of Transportation.
And Eric Kingstrom, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability.
So I think the first item in front of you, Mayor, are the 8 staff technical amendments. And it cannot, we also, since there's no PowerPoint, we do have the presentation here. And so that first page just gives that brief summary of those amendments. And these are really grammatical and technical in nature.
Okay, and I don't know, do you have a presentation or do you just want to answer
No,
any additional
we'll
questions?
just answer additional
So colleagues,
questions.
I'm going to suggest that we vote on these as a package. Is there any objection to that? Are there any further questions on any of these staff technical amendments?
So moved.
Very good. I don't think we need to move. I think we can just vote on all of them as a package since they were already moved as a package. Is that correct?
Yes, and could you also, I've been reminded that there was also a new impact statement. If you want to maybe do that right after that or do that right before, they would like to just make sure you don't have no objections to substituting the impact statement.
Okay, do you need a motion for a substitute to include that?
It's not an attachment to the ordinance, so I think you can just do it with council's
I'll just take a
consent.
head nod. Are there any objections to including it? I don't see any objections, so consider it officially included.
And staff reminds me that there are also substitute findings, and do you want those done at the end?
They can be done at the end. It's not an impact statement. It was a replacement of the findings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you want substitute findings on the table. Okay, I'll move the substitute findings. Is there a second?
Second.
Carla, can you call the roll, please, on the substitute findings?
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Hardesty?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye, substitute findings are on the table. Any further discussion on these? Carla, can you call the roll for the package of the staff technical amendments with the substitute?
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Hardesty?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. So the staff technical amendments are adopted with the substitute in place. Next, let's move to commissioner amendments. Commissioner Udaley, I believe you had an amendment. Is there any
Yes.
further comment
Thank
on
you,
that?
Mayor.
Thank you.
This amendment listed number 1 on the amendment list. It inserts language to exempt a defined list of affordable housing projects that are currently in the development pipeline. This amendment is supported by the second ordinance we heard last week, which establishes alternative bicycle parking standards for the exempted projects. As mentioned last week, this solution acknowledges the unique budget and timeline of these pipeline projects that have developed their financing packages based on current bicycle parking standards, while still ensuring that these affordable housing projects include bicycle parking.
Very good. Any question or discussion on Commissioner Udaley's amendment number 1? Anything else from staff on that? Very good. Carla, please call the roll on amendment number 1.
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. Amendment number 1 is adopted. Next, I'd like to propose that we vote on Commissioner Amendments 2, 3, and 4 together as a package. As you'll recall, these amendments all provide technical fixes to improve plan review. Specifically, number 2 ensures that bicycle parking information is included and reviewed at the land use review phase, particularly due to the spatial layout needs and location requirements. Number 3 clarifies that the FAR exemption, the floor area ratio exemption, is for bike parking rooms and does not include the individual 2 by 6 foot spaces that may be included within the dwelling units. This would take an enormous amount of staff time and the resources for the Bureau of Development Services reviewers to do that level of calculation. And number 4 clarifies the definition of the bike rack design to ensure that cable components are not included in the rack definition. Cables are very easy for thieves to cut through. Unfortunately, I've learned that the hard way. And these kinds of products put tenants and users at a huge disadvantage if there isn't anything solid to secure the lock to. Are there any follow-up questions or discussion on Commissioner Amendments 2, 3, or 4? Anything else from staff to add? Very good. Carla, could you please call the roll for this package of Commissioner amendments?
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The amendments are adopted. And finally, for Commissioner Amendment 5, this is an increase to the non-conforming use threshold. This amendment would increase the dollar threshold from the current level of $168,550 to $300,000. This includes, this increase to the non-conforming use threshold as part of a larger Bureau Planning and Sustainability and Bureau Development Services strategy to improve permitting processes and timelines. I don't know if there's any questions from my colleagues on this amendment. Commissioner Hardesty?
Thank you. That's one that I don't know the why of. Could you help
Sure,
me?
sure. When we pass changes in code like what you're doing today to the bike parking, zoning code doesn't immediately apply to existing development. It's applied to new development going forward. But we do have a provision called non-conforming upgrades, which is when there are large-scale tenant improvements or remodeling projects to existing buildings above this dollar amount, they can be required to set aside a certain amount of project dollars towards incremental upgrades to come closer to current standards. And we have that dollar amount goes up automatically by the construction cost index, but we also periodically have adjusted it for policy reasons when we do projects that could substantially change the number of people who are now non-conforming. So this was suggested as a way to address some of the permitting cost concerns and small business impact concerns related to the bike parking change because we're changing the code.
That was a very succinct and understandable explanation, and I am very grateful for that. Thank you.
That's why we brought him up here.
My new hero, right?
All right, good. Any further input on amendment number 5? Any further questions? Very good. Carla, please call the roll on amendment number 5, please.
Udaly.
Well, thank you, Eric, for that succinct explanation. I think, even commissioners can understand the intricacy of our codes when explained by someone like you. Happy to vote aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. Amendment 5 is adopted. The final item for today then is to adopt the amendment to replace Exhibit B. That's the findings report. We already did that.
You already did that.
So we did
Switched
that. We
order.
did that up front. So that is completed. And I think that is it. Yes, since there are no additional amendments, we're closing the testimony for the Bicycle Parking Code Update Project, items 1061 and 1062. Thank you. The next step is that the ordinance will go to a second reading and final vote. This is the second reading and final vote on the ordinances as amended. That will be December 4th, time certain 11:05. Is that right, Carla?
Correct.
Okay, so December 4th, time certain 11:05 for the ordinances as amended today. Legal counsel, have I forgotten anything, or does that close us out?
No, you've covered it. We're good.
All right, anything else from staff?
No, thank you.
Thanks for your
Thank you very much.
incredible work on this. The speed with which we went through that belies the considerable amount of energy you put into that. So 1061 and 1062 move to second reading is noted. And then, we are at item number 1078 on the regular agenda.
Accept a grant in the amount of $3,140,000 from TriMet and authorize intergovernmental agreement for Central City in Motion projects, improving transit speed and reliability.
Commissioner Daly.
Thank you, Mayor. This intergovernmental agreement allows PBOT to be reimbursed for bus lanes and red pavement markings TriMet has agreed to fund with their statewide Transportation Improvement Fund formula funds, pardon me, otherwise known as STIF, which is an unfortunate acronym. TriMet and PBOT's collaboration on Central City in Motion and enhanced transit corridor plans resulted in TriMet including these projects in their STIF plan. These projects are intended to provide faster and more reliable bus service through capital and operational investments. Here to provide details and answer any questions is PBOT Project Manager Gabe Graff. Welcome, Gabe.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Mayor, Commissioners, thank you for having me. In light of your packed agenda, I will make a very brief presentation, and then if you have any questions, let me know. In November of 2018, Council adopted the Central City in Motion Plan, as Commissioner Udaly mentioned. This plan was designed to address the increasing demands on our Central City's transportation system with new investments in transit priority, bikeways, and safer crossings. The plan identified 18 projects, including 9 miles of bus lanes, 17 miles of protected bikeways, and 88 pedestrian crossing improvements. Since adoption, PBOT has been working with partners such as TriMet to fund, design, and construct these identified projects. And this agreement with TriMet for $3.14 million funds some of the key transit bottlenecks identified in the Central City in Motion plan. I'd like to thank TriMet, specifically Jamie Snook, who's with us, if you have any questions for TriMet, who brought this agreement to the finish line. This IGA will fund some work which you've seen on the streets already, specifically the Southwest Madison bus lane approaching the Hawthorne Bridge, the Northwest Everett bus lane approaching the Steel Bridge, components of the Burnside bus lane that was recently striped in November, and then some additional work extending the bus lane on Madison, an additional block once the Portland building has completed construction there, extending the East Burnside bus lane out to 12th Avenue, once construction is completed at the MLK and Burnside corner, and additional red pavement markings, of which you may have seen a couple on Grand, MLK, and Main. If you have any questions, do let me know.
Commissioner Hardesty.
I'm curious as to whether or not we're looking at whether bus shelters are appropriate along the line where we're making these improvements. Because with the improvements I see being made in East Portland do not include bus shelters. So I'm just curious as to where does that conversation happen? And who makes the decision about whether you get red lanes or whether you get actually shelter from the rain?
Good question. I certainly can get back to you on how those shelter decisions are made, unless Jamie.
I've asked that question quite a bit, and no one has been able to.
I can tell you it's TriMet.
Yeah.
Well, I know it's TriMet, but if we are partners with TriMet, then hopefully we are having those conversations with TriMet because.
We are having them, but this is not
I understand that this is
pertinent to
not.
this item.
It may not be pertinent in your view, but as we continue to partner with TriMet, if we're not putting these issues on the record, these issues will never be addressed. Because again, I've asked this question every time we've had a partnership with TriMet, and every time we've had this partnership, I hear we're working with TriMet. That is not a sufficient answer for me. So maybe with your help, I can get a meeting with TriMet in my office, and we can talk about who decides who gets the butt cheek lanes and who gets the full shelter where they're covered from the rain.
Commissioner, you can go through my office and we will fill you in on where we're at that with that conversation.
That's one option. Thank you. I
Yep,
appreciate you.
my pleasure, yeah.
Thanks.
Gabe, can you tell us what kind of improvements we're seeing in commute times with the Red Lane? Is that information you have, or?
Yeah, we have some early information about how TriMet buses are performing. So the Southwest Madison lane was installed in May, so that's been in operation the longest. It's a 4-block stretch, so it's not a very long bus lane, but it's one of the most congested portions of the lines that travel on it. And we're seeing about a minute of time savings every day for those buses, such that TriMet's been able to adjust the schedule, I think, of the line 14, is that right? Yeah. To make that transit service faster. Everett and Burnside are considerably longer bus lanes, and we expect that we'll get even better performance out of those.
Great, thank you.
Does that complete your presentation?
It does.
Great, excellent. Thank you. Carla, is there public testimony on this island?
We have one person, Maggie.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. Hello again.
Hi, Maggie, Portland Homeless Town Hall. You know, I've been to Mexico, and it pains me to say that I can go to a country that doesn't have the budget that the United States of America has and find out they have better public transportation. And I'm sure you all have been to other countries as well where you've discovered, they have a smaller budget and a more faster maneuverable, responsive transportation bureau. And so setting aside the big behemoth that is public transportation in America, whether they need certain infrastructure or not. And I would like to go to Hardesty's comment. Yes, we do need to discuss why certain areas get
Commissioner Daly.
Maggie, this is
yes.
about whether or not you support us being reimbursed by TriMet for work we've already done on the red lanes. We have a
should you be-
packed day,
Yeah,
and
should you
we
be
need you
reimbursed
to-
by TriMet? Yes.
Thank you.
Yes,
We
yes.
need relevant testimony.
And I would like to say that TriMet is kind of the underground railroad for the disadvantaged and privileged in terms of their liberation from things like domestic violence and their ability to get jobs. And I would like TriMet to just keep that in mind when they're giving out tickets. Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. And with that, any further discussion? Carla, please call the roll on 1078.
Daly?
Got to get back to the end of my book. Thank you, Gabe. My office has championed Central City in Motion and has leaned on PBOT to deliver these important projects as quickly as possible. Because of this, bus riders crossing the Burnside, Hawthorne, and Steel bridges are already experiencing the benefits of our work. I'm encouraged that a plan we passed this time last year is already having positive benefits for Portlanders, because as we know, the wheels of bureaucracy tend to move very slow, especially, ironically, in our Transportation Bureau sometimes. And I'm also encouraged to see the partnership between TriMet and PBOT that this IGA represents. I'd like to thank TriMet for recognizing our shared interest in making transit faster and more reliable for funding these improvements. Now I'd like to see more buses whizzing by traffic, especially on Burnside and that dedicated bus line. And I look forward to more progress in the coming year with projects currently in design on Southwest NATO, Southwest 4th Avenue, Northwest Broadway, Southeast Hawthorne, MLK, Grand, and East Burnside. I vote aye.
Fritz.
Commissioner Udela, you're really exciting me with your passion for transit. I thought you were going to say the wheels on the bus go round and round. And thanks to these new bus lanes, they will be going round and round rather than sitting in traffic. So thank you very much for your work on this. Aye.
Hardesty.
We certainly want buses to move faster. We certainly want buses to be more accessible, especially to folks who don't live in a central city. I will never not take an opportunity to remind TriMet that they need to be a better partner. Once again, we need much better public transit access in East Portland and other parts of the city. And I will also say that I am very concerned that TriMet continues to hire security, which if they made the system free or different, they would not have now 4 security forces that are having a detrimental impact on people's willingness and ability to ride public transit. I vote aye for this project, but I will continue to have this conversation every opportunity I get to say to TriMet, you need to be a better partner. Aye.
Wheeler.
I strongly support this ordinance before us today. I support Central City in Motion. I want to thank Commissioner Udaley and her team for their leadership. I want to thank PBOT for their leadership. This is a grant that we are accepting from TriMet. I want to thank them for this. The bottom line for me is this. We talk a lot about improving mobility in this city for everyone. And a real sticking point for us has been improving the percentage of people who are willing to take transit. And I don't think you force people into transit. I think what you do is you give them a value proposition so that they want to take transit. And the only way you can create a value proposition for transit is to not have transit become stuck in increasing traffic along with everything else. And so other cities have demonstrated that if you can speed up public transit, it makes it a better option for people to be able to take, particularly those on the margin who say, okay, I could get into my car and I could commute, but if I can get there faster or if it's just as convenient or more convenient to be on the bus, that's what I'm going to do. And I also, I hear from people all the time who say, well, look, Mayor Wheeler, I appreciate that. I understand the city is only going to get more congested as population grows and traffic becomes more intense. But why don't you build more streets? And the answer is there's no room to build more streets. We're stuck with the infrastructure that we have. So the question is, how do we make the infrastructure we have more effective? More, how do we increase the number of people? And the only way that makes sense is to have more people taking larger vehicles. That is transit. That is the buses. That is the rail lines, et cetera. And if the buses are just getting caught in the same increasing congestion as everybody else, it's not improving anything. It's not providing incentivization for people to take transit. And I hear what my colleagues are saying. Yes, we need more buses. We need more extensive bus service. That is all true. But the issue before us today is Central City in Motion, and I'm very happy to lend my support to it. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted. Thank you, everybody who worked hard on that. Next up, can we take like a 3-minute break? Would anybody object to that? Sure. Why don't we take a 3-minute recess? Back in session, could you read, please, items 1079 and 1080 together, please?
Yes. 1079, adopt a set of priority values, expectations, and the recommended option to guide the design and implementation of the City of Portland's Bull Run filtration projects. Item 1080, authorize a contract with Stantec Consulting Services, Inc. for design services for the Bull Run filtration project in the amount of $51 million.
Commissioner Fritz.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a brief recap of where we are on this. Last week, we had a staff presentation and we heard public testimony, but we didn't have time for council members to ask staff questions, so I'm going to have staff come on up so that that can happen in a few minutes. And I didn't give my full remarks because it was very late in the day and we wanted to get to public testimony because people had been waiting a long time. So as a reminder, we're not voting on either of these items today. And I want to also say right up front that the Water Bureau should have been more clear about the cost estimate for the filtration, about what the cost estimate for the filtration plant included, because it didn't include the cost of the pipes, and that was a major mistake, and we apologize. Compliance agreement with the Oregon Health Authority requires a filtration plant. The council could not decide unilaterally to switch to an ultraviolet plant. The city would be required to negotiate with the Oregon Health Authority on a new approach. The Water Bureau formed a technical advisory committee of national experts to advise the Bureau and help determine the optimal features of the water filtration plant. These members spent weeks reviewing and advising, including site visits to the locations under consideration. And this plan is the direct outcome of the Technical Advisory Committee's recommendations. And I passed out to you a list of the members and some of their background. Another reason to move forward now with the filtration plant is the opportunity we've been invited to apply for a Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act partnership, or a WIFIA loan. This low-interest loan will significantly reduce the cost of borrowing for this project, with a longer payback period, meaning that the 200,000 people coming to Portland by 2035 will help pay for the project. We do acknowledge that the Water Bureau, working with the council, will need to look for ways to further assist low-income residents with their utility bills as rates increase. After our last council hearing, Water Bureau staff reviewed the questions that were asked, and we've provided that to you in a document. There are extra copies over by the council clerk for members of the public. And of course, you just got this, but as we're not voting till next week, there'll be time for you to review those and ask any further questions. And with that, Mayor, I'd like to open it up for any questions for staff.
Very good. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank all of you. I've seen more of Water Bureau staff in the last 48 hours than I think I've seen in all my time on the city council. I'm very grateful for the time you spent really helping me understand the history. And I still wonder whether or not right now, today, this is the right project at the right time. We know that when you started this process, and I can appreciate the challenge of working through a variety of different city councils and different city council directives. But today, we're at a place where we are anticipating spending over $1 billion for a water filtration process. And my question is, knowing what we know today, are any of the other options something we should consider, notwithstanding having to go back to the health department and get some approvals, not to mention that there would be some other due diligence that would have to happen? Today, why aren't any of the other options still viable? And why would we move forward with this $1 billion project?
So reasonable people can...
Remember to identify yourself, please.
Yes, please.
Why do I forget that all the time? My name is Mike Stewart. I'm the director of the Water Bureau. Reasonable people can come to different conclusions on a very, very complex project. What I'm going to say now are my beliefs, my professional opinion from 45 years of building and operating public infrastructure. I believe that the Water Bureau, the city, and it's bigger than the city. It's virtually everyone in the metro area needs a filtration plant. In some ways, we have been lucky for the last 40 or 50 years. Most people have built them. There are thousands of filtration plants around the country. They are flexible. They allow you to handle what comes up in the regulatory world. And the infrastructure that we operate and BES operates is different than other public infrastructure. We are highly regulated public health entities, and public health regulation never backs up. It only gets tighter. It is my personal belief that a UV plant, which is really the only other option, it only answers crypto. It answers nothing else. Now, we have what I'll call black swan events, very high consequence, low probability events. And those events are difficult for us to think about. We are all biased by the so-called normal distribution. And you can look at that statistically. The question for black swan events is, can you afford not to? Can I tell you that we're going to have a fire in the watershed? No. Can I tell you exactly when we're going to have an earthquake? Well, I can give you a probability figure for the earthquake. Can I tell you that we're going to have turbidity events? I can tell you, yes, we are going to have turbidity events. We've been lucky the last few years because of how rainfall happens. A UV plant does nothing for any one of those. And I believe there's another risk, and this risk could be wrong. The minute EPA writes another regulation, we would be back here having this same discussion. Because a UV plant does one thing: it kills crypto. One of the unfortunate things in our political process is you don't hear people come and testify for things. That's kind of unfortunate, I think. People expect us to be able to do the right thing. And the right thing for our community, for people with compromised immune systems, and so on, is to build a filtration plant that can deal with all of these risks. And that would be my opinion. We have a huge advantage here right now. Yes, we have to build a very, very expensive filtration plant, which I will tell you, using the 820 number, if we'd have built it in the 70s when others built it, would have cost $125 million. If we had covered the reservoirs in the 70s when the city first agreed to cover the reservoirs, it would cost about $50 million instead of $400. In the end, maybe now, we are going to have to build a filtration plant. And if you know you're going to have to do something in the economic world, it's better to do it now than later, because inflation, frankly, eats your lunch in the end. So I believe that this is the right time. Not only is it the right time for that reason, but we have a tremendous opportunity in WIFIA. The water infrastructure, there you go, because I knew Commissioner Fritz would catch me on the blasted abbreviation. That is a tremendous opportunity to moderate the rate impact of what we have to do. We bond things for 25 years, 20 years. This will allow us to bond for 35 years. It will allow us to lock in low interest rates. We're doing really well nationally in interest rates right now. And the combined effect of that, and there are other things that maybe if Cecilia was here, she could talk about, but we can negotiate about every aspect of this deal, including when we start paying, and do that in a way that mostly benefits our ratepayers. So I think Cecilia wants to smack me because she doesn't want to say what the number will be, but I'm a lot taller than she is.
Don't say what the number is
Don't
like.
go. It will make a
If we've learned
positive
nothing
impact
else.
on our rates.
Quite frankly, for me, if we're going to be able to save ratepayers, because what we're talking about is significant increase in monthly bills for ratepayers. I would want to know, and we haven't done well with numbers in the past, but I would certainly want to know what is the difference between having access to the loan and doing it the way we would always do it through the bonding process. What is the, and if it's not a number, maybe there's a percentage, but I personally need to know what's different, right? Because for me, that's the only reason to do it now is that we have access to this loan.
So
if we're not going to do it now, if we're going to do it now, what's the compelling financial reason to do it now?
I'm Cecilia Hoon, the Finance Director for the Water Bureau. Commissioner, Mike's right, I've been very reluctant to try to pin ourselves down to a rate benefit related to the WIFIA loan. Based on the letter of interest that we submitted, we needed to identify the benefit of having the WIFIA loan. There was a lot of assumptions in there, but based on that, what we estimated is that we can be at about the current rate forecast of 7.4. There's still a lot of terms to be negotiated, and our goal is to negotiate a loan agreement that would be most beneficial to our ratepayer. We're hoping, again, to do better, but without having gone through the negotiation, understanding the rate we would lock in at in a year, it would be at the current Treasury rate when we close the loan. So not knowing what that's going to look like in a year. The term of the loan, when we start paying, as Mike mentioned, those are all flexible with the program. So until we have all of that, I don't have certainty on the benefit of the WIFIA loan. But again, based on preliminary modeling of what we think we would be looking at, we're looking at hovering around our current rate forecast of 7.4.
If we were to delay moving forward, let's say 90 days, would you have more of an opportunity to give us better understanding of the impact on ratepayers for this project?
Not 90 days. The application process, we committed to EPA to submit the application in spring of 2020. After the application is in, there's the review period by EPA, and then we go into negotiation of the terms of the agreement. And that could take another 1 to 6 months before we close. So our goal is to actually have the loan agreement closed by, my goal would be by the end of next summer, so that we can go into the next budget process with all of that known information going in and update the rate forecast accordingly.
So can you apply for the loan without us having already affirmed or approved the issues that are in front of us now?
Our understanding is we do need to lay out the project, the scope, the schedule, and the expected cost of the project. And so the sizing of the loan will be based on the specifics of what we plan to do, and the EPA has staff on that will be reviewing all of that, ensuring that our cost estimate is, reasonable. That's the word that they used, is reasonable, which would include and can include contingencies.
Thank you.
So I have a couple of similar questions. And the first question I have is maybe a slight rephrasing of the first question that you answered, Mike, but I want to hear it answered in this format. When the prior city council started discussing this issue, the original estimate was somewhere in the $350 million range, is my recollection, for filtration. Now it's in the billion plus range. Given that the estimated cost of a filtration system, now that you have scoped the project a little more thoroughly, has only escalated, and it's escalated by at least 300%, do the original assumptions that led you to the filtration system versus UV we heard some testimony the other day on chlorine dioxide. Do the original assumptions hold up for the filtration system today at $1 billion, given that the decision was made when it was $300 million?
So Going back a little, there were two numbers mentioned. The original number mentioned was 500, which is still a ways off. And then I was pressed and said, well, we could be hopeful that it was 350. And that wasn't the best number on the planet. But I only had 60 days to figure out what takes 2.5 years to figure out. For the reasons I stated already, I think we need to build a filtration plant. I realize that it is expensive, but it is far and away not the most expensive thing the city has bought. I would refer you to the big pipe. And these things are outcomes of federal regulation, but as a person who has worked most of his life swimming in federal regulations, agree or disagree with the regulations, they are done for good public health purposes at the time, and they're just expensive. I believe for the reasons stated that this is a good investment. People tend to focus on high side or low side numbers because they can, but those two numbers are not guaranteed. The numbers that I'm hanging my hat on right now with the planning studies we've done is 820. And yes, it could be different than that. And as you go through this design process, we are very good when we finally get a design at sticking with the numbers that we have. I think the majority of our projects have come in on time and under budget once you have a design in place. And that I think is what will happen. The challenge in this one is it takes quite a while to get it designed. So as you work your way through the design, the numbers get closer and closer. And I'm sure you've seen the funnel picture. It goes like this. And you get closer and closer. So I think 820 is a good number. I think the ratepayers, our citizens, deserve a filtration plant. I wish more people who were fans of this, commissioners, gotten some emails and calls, and so have I, wondering, why haven't you done this already? I think we need to build a filtration plant. That is my opinion.
Could I ask a follow-up question on the filtration plant? And you laid out a good case for it, and you said you didn't know when the earthquake would hit. I certainly don't. We've already seen the possibility of wildfires and the incursion into the Bull Run area. We heard some testimony last week from people who said that in the event of a catastrophic wildfire or a landslide into the Bull Run, filtration isn't actually going to work. What can you tell us on that front? Is a filtration system designed to actually be able to handle the kind of sediment that would be created by a massive landslide off of Mount Hood, or alternatively, a catastrophic wildfire in the Bull Run Basin?
I'm David Peters. I'm the program manager for the Water Bureau. And what filtration does in those situations is provide you protections. And it does that by allowing you to get back up to speed fairly quickly. Let's take the example of a catastrophic landslide into the watershed. If we're an unfiltered system, we would not have a way to get that system back online to be usable again. Filtration.
Could you explain that a little bit? Could you flesh that out?
Well,
why do you say that?
If you had a landslide and the turbidity is very high, once it's over 5 NTU, they call it, we cannot serve it to the public. So as long as that water was turbid, we could not serve it to the public, and we'd have to be, we couldn't serve it to the public.
But the answer to your question, Mayor, is yes, a filtration plant would take care of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so there is no, maybe a different way of asking it, there's no upper limit to the amount of turbidity that a filtration system could handle? And would that upper limit, if it does exist, be exceeded in a catastrophic forest fire or a massive landslide off of Mount Hood into the Bull Run Reservoir?
So where my comments are going is that, yeah, the filtration you could exceed the capacity of the filtration plant for a period of time. But the filtration plan allows you over time to get back online more quickly. So as the turbidity begins to drop, you can begin treating that water and then serving it, which you cannot do as an unfiltered system.
Okay. And I'm hearing your admonition that it's only going to get more expensive. And Mike, you laid out a good case that the filtration system is sort of the best practice in terms of achieving multiple goals. But let's say the council came to the conclusion that as much as we would like to achieve multiple goals, what we can actually afford to do right now is meet the immediate threshold requirement, which is cryptosporidium. Would that lead us in a different direction? And what would the potential cost savings be?
Mr. Mayor, Gabrielle Salmer, Deputy Director, I can answer the first part of your question as to what the process would be if this council wanted to make a different policy decision than the council made in 2017 to pursue filtration. If this council wanted to pursue an option that was less expensive to address the immediate threat of cryptosporidium, then there would have to be a conversation with the Oregon Health Authority. We have a bilateral compliance agreement that was negotiated in 2017 after this council's direction to build filtration within a certain number of years. It lays out the terms of that. It does not say that the city can treat this issue in other ways. It's very specific. It has to be filtration and it has to be within a certain number of years, given the complexity of that solution, that treatment solution. So there would have to be conversations with OHA to write a new bilateral compliance agreement if that was no longer the direction of council. I don't want to leave anyone with the misunderstanding that that would be an easy task or just a rewriting of that agreement. To get this agreement in the first place took a lot of negotiation by the city attorney's office, by the Water Bureau, by this council and by our commissioner in charge at the time to arrange a bilateral agreement, something that we could both agree to. And we would certainly, if the council was to go in that direction, make OHA and EPA, who delegates primacy for these issues to Oregon Health Authority, think twice about our motivation and our readiness to complete what we have promised to do, and it would certainly, in my estimation, jeopardize our WIFIA application.
Okay. And that's a compelling argument in and of itself. And Mike, if I'm hearing you correctly, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but perfect. It sounds like your thinking, as you look into the future, is that eventually other items that a UV plant would not be able to address would be required. Is that your existential threat to the UV?
Existential is a really hard word.
Indeed it is.
The threat is additional regulation.
Okay.
The only thing that UV does, the only thing it was ever designed to do was kill the small pathogen called cryptosporidium. And I've watched and waited in federal regulations. I've been a federal regulator. It never gets tighter. Or looser. It's always going to have more regulation. They're studying some 35, 36 chemicals right now. One of the challenges in water utilities right now is we can find these things down to 10 to the minus 18th, 10 to the minus 19th. Sometimes people don't know even what that means. Was it background or not? And the answer, when you have advocacy groups and regulators who are in doubt, is to write a rule. And one fear, looking 50 years out, is that they write a rule. We'd be lucky if we decided to build a UV plant and it lasted 50 years, maybe, could be 10. And then what have you done with $200 million? Because then you've spent $200 million and $820 million to get the same thing done.
Sure.
So water utilities nationwide, all of us are admittedly very conservative. We try to look very long-term, like my pipes last 150 to 200 years, and that's the way we think.
Right, and I don't want to discount that. When you're talking about our water supply, I think erring on the side of conservatism is the wise thing, and I appreciate your perspective. Thank you, that completes my questions for now. Does anybody else have any further questions or comments? Just to clarify with legal counsel, my understanding is we already took public testimony on these. We simply carried it over for discussion purposes. Very good. If there is no other business, then 1079 is the first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading.
I'd like to vote on the resolution as well.
I'm sorry?
I'd like to vote on the resolution at the same time.
Oh, should I?
Yeah, that's fine. And 1080, which is the authorization of a contract with Stantec. This is also a first reading. It moves to second reading. Very good. Thank you. Thank you for answering questions, and thank you, Commissioner Fritz, for the additional written testimony.
Thank you, colleagues.
And then if we could read item 1081, I'm going to move it.
A competitive solicitation and contract with the lowest responsible bidder and provide payment for construction of the Arbor Lodge Kenton Sewer Rehabilitation Project number E10978 for an estimated cost of $5,350,000.
Colleagues, as you know, Commissioner Fish wanted to be here today. He's unable to make it, so at his request, he would like to move this item to November 27th. And it's my understanding, Carla, that's to the regular agenda?
Correct, yes.
Very good. Then we'll go back to the consent agenda items that were pulled. Item number 1065 being the first up, please.
Amend contract with Cellco Partners doing business as Verizon Wireless to provide wireless services for an additional 5-year term and increase the not-to-exceed value by $17,500,000 for a new not-to-exceed total of $26,800,000.
Colleagues, Cellco Partnership, DBA, Verizon Wireless has provided the city with cellular service since the year 2013. Verizon provides voice services for 3,500 city cell phones, data for 1,100 tablets, and network connectivity for 1,400 other devices, including public safety mobile data terminals, otherwise known as MDTs. Verizon was chosen as the preferred carrier as they had the most complete coverage in the Portland metro area. Coverage was the overriding metric for vendor selection in this case. The Bureau of Technology Services has appropriation in their fiscal year 2019-20 budget to cover the first year of anticipated expense associated with this action. Funding for the second through fifth years will be included in the base Bureau budgets for fiscal year 2021 through fiscal year 2023 to fiscal year 2024. I had asked that this item be pulled because I knew that there were some questions from my colleagues. Telecom Supervisor Lee Nichols is here to address any questions that you may have. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for being here. My question is, there's a significant increase in cost in this extension, and did we go back out and see if someone else now has the infrastructure that would give us a better deal for the dollars that we're investing in this particular contract?
We have not.
Why not?
We have an existing relationship with
You may want to move that closer.
I'm not sure the mic's on. There,
Oh,
thank you.
excuse me.
Thanks, Lee.
Sorry, we have not, because we have an existing relationship with Verizon for the equipment that we have in place, and we're continuing the purchases now. With the advent of the new AT&T FirstNets and the 5G infrastructure that's coming into place, it may be acceptable to take this on soon, but we haven't done it yet.
And I'm reluctant to continue to renew contracts without some due diligence. When do you plan to go back out and find out who else is out there that could provide us with the service?
I'd have to discuss that with our senior leadership and get back to you.
It's very unfortunate that you didn't come prepared to answer specific questions about what we're doing here today. So, Mayor, I'm not going to be able to get my questions answered today, so that probably means that I will be a no vote for this particular issue. Thank you.
Sure.
So since it's an emergency, we should carry it over.
That's my intention. I want to make sure that as long as we have Lee here, that let's get any questions answered people have. Very good. So, Lee, what I'm
Actually,
going
I
to
do
do.
have a question.
Oh, Commissioner Fritz?
I know from my personal cell phone use that you have contracts, and if you try to get out of the contract early, you then have to pay a penalty, or it's difficult to do. And there's also the issue of who owns the phones, which thankfully your technology service takes care of all that logistics. But would there be a penalty for not continuing with Verizon?
No, actually, our contracts do not have early termination fees, and we do not purchase subsidized equipment. We own all of that outright.
Okay.
So switching, there's costs associated with that, but there's no early termination fees.
Thank you.
Lee,
And
I-
remember,
I'm
I'm
sorry,
sorry,
Commissioner
Mayor.
Hardesty. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is not a new contract. This is an extension of a current contract with significant more costs. So the fact that we can't get those questions answered today, I find very problematic.
Very good. So let me do this. I'll pull this back, and we'll have the Office of Management and Finance work with the individual commissioners' offices to get their issues addressed. Is there a critical time issue on this item?
There is. The
How
contract
critical
has
is it?
expired at the end of October. So if we don't renew the purchasing authority, we won't be able to pay the existing invoices.
Okay, well, here's what we're gonna have to delay it at least a week.
Sure.
Until we can get the commissioners' questions answered, and I support their desire to have their questions answered. It's not an inconsequential contract. My understanding, Lee, is that the primary metric used on this contract is actually service area coverage. Is that incorrect?
No, that's correct.
So the primary metric by which we decide who we are going to negotiate this particular contract with is numerically determined by who has the largest coverage area. Is that correct?
Yes, the most complete coverage.
And that leads us to Verizon Wireless for this particular contract. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so why would that not be the answer to Commissioner Hardesty's question about why we selected this provider and why it's not been open to others?
The question I heard from Commissioner Hardesty was, have we looked at other people? Recently, we have not. We negotiated the contract a few years ago, and we did the analysis at that point. And as technology changes, we're going to have to do that analysis again. But right now, we don't have that plan.
Okay, so why don't we do this? Why don't we pull it for 1 week?
Mr. Mayor,
Oh, Commissioner.
there's only
first.
3 of us here next week, so we wouldn't be able to pass this as an emergency next week. So I'm wondering if it's possible to get the questions answered by tomorrow and just set it over till tomorrow?
Can we do that without the proper notification, or do we have time for the notification, given that it's
But
an
we're okay with
afternoon
that,
session?
Lindley.
It's still within the same, essentially the same council meeting, so you'd essentially be
Fabulous.
setting it over till within the same meeting, so that's
Glad to
fine.
hear it. Okay, can you work quickly on this?
Absolutely.
All right, good. So let's do this. Let's set this over until tomorrow afternoon, and that would be sometime subsequent to 2 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item that was pulled was 1068.
Did you want to read 1069 as well? They're both,
They're different, though, aren't they?
I'm sorry. Staff had said they were reading them together, so
Why?
you'd have to ask Tia. She just walked out of the room.
No,
I can read them
they
separate.
seem totally unrelated to me,
Yeah,
so I'd say 1068 separately.
Okay, 1068.
Yes.
Pay attorney's fees settlement from masonry building owners of Oregon et al. Litigation in the sum of $350,000 involving the Portland Bureau of Development Services and the Bureau of Emergency Management.
Okay, and is there any reason why, who pulled that one?
Lightning pulled this.
Okay, and I don't see him here.
He's here.
Oh, there he is. He's on the other side. You've changed up on me. It's good to see you. Very good. Would you like to provide testimony, and maybe that'll help us guide any staff questions on this? I'll read you what I have by way of opening on this. The ordinance approves the settlement of the attorney's fees demand from John DiLorenzo and the law firm Davis Wright Tremaine, who represented a group of building owners affected by proposed rules related to unreinforced masonry buildings. In May of this year, the federal court judge issued a preliminary injunction prohibiting the city from enforcing ordinances passed by the city council in October of 2018 and February of 2019. The unreinforced masonry ordinances were repealed by city council on October 23rd, 2019. Plaintiffs are entitled to their reasonable litigation costs and fees in such cases. Risk management in the city's attorney's office recommended paying $350,000 to Davis Wright Tremaine to resolve this final aspect of the lawsuit. And although it's not on my talking points, it is my understanding that this was a mutually agreed upon settlement.
Okay.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Super Karma. Again, when I did public communication on this item, I said we should leave it optional to the landlords if they want to put up the placard or also put something in their lease. And the reason why I did that, I wanted them to have the option. If some people were willing to do that, they could do it. If not, that's okay too. Now, what we have right here is, obviously you don't listen to people doing public communication, which I've heard from one commissioner, which is completely clueless, and I won't state the name, but here's my point, is that when we run up these type of fees of $350,000 for this type of a mistake, and now we're going to claim this on, I understand, the insurance. So my position is that falling under the E&O insurance. And to Attorney John DiLorenzo, and I know you're listening, my good friend, and I had a discussion with you last year on some other issues, congratulations. You approved, you can fight City Hall and win. And again, to Mr. Jim Atwood, I agree with you on setting up a war chest. And whenever they come out with these type of items that are going to be fought and they're going to lose, maybe they won't take it as far as they did before. Again, $350,000, I know the amount was higher. I'm a little disappointed, Mr. DiLorenzo, on why you settled lower. But again, you win every time, so I highly recommend your law firm. Again, when the city wants to challenge you, the city will lose, because you can fight and win the city. $350,000 to the public, pay the bill, and feel good about it. This is absolute incompetence. Now, commissioners and the mayor, listen to the public, and this would have never happened. Enjoy taking the money out of the public's wallet. Congratulations, what a victory.
Thank you.
Good work, Mr. DiLorenzo. Good work.
Time's up. Thank you, Mr. Lightning, for your always spirited remarks. Any further discussion? Carla, please call the roll.
Udaly?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Hardesty? Wheeler?
I'm going to make more commentary on this than I probably should. I will vote for it because the judge ruled very clearly, and I support both the rule and the letter of the law, and this was adjudicated in a court, and the city of Portland lost. And we therefore are responsible for reimbursing the attorney for his fair fees in this particular case, which we have an obligation to do, and we will do that. I also just want to lay down a marker on the record for the future that I supported the URM placarding ordinance. And the reason I supported it was I believed it was important for people to understand that there are measurable, demonstrable, factual, additional risks in the event of an earthquake to living in an unreinforced masonry building. And while some may think it is presumptuous, I actually believe that the public has a right to know if they are living in such a building, if they are visiting such a building, or if they are paying rent to lease a commercial space in such a building. So my support of the placarding ordinance was based on my belief that the public should have more information rather than less information. But I I will also just say this, and this may be just a word of admonition to the future. When the time comes that we do have a catastrophic earthquake in the city of Portland, and if we experience the reality that many other cities around the world, including Christchurch, Kobe, Japan, that I just recently had the opportunity to visit and go see their earthquake memorial for the thousands of people who died there, and I heard their mayor's admonition about unreinforced masonry buildings and what it meant to the people in their community during a major earthquake. When the earthquake does strike in the city of Portland, I wonder if people will have a different perspective about this. And so I'll just put that there. I want it on the record for the future, and I want the record to reflect that I supported giving the public the information that I believe they have a right to know for their own safety, the safety of their family, and the safety of their friends. With that, I vote aye. The settlement is approved. Last item, 1069.
Pay property damage claim of Portland State University in the sum of $49,580 involving the Portland Bureau of Transportation.
I have a brief statement here that's been provided to me, unless Commissioner Udaley, did you? It says, on November 10th, 2018, a Portland streetcar was proceeding westbound on Southwest Montgomery Street when the rear end of the streetcar left the tracks between Southwest 5th Avenue and Southwest 6th Avenue as it entered Portland State University's Urban Plaza. While there were no collisions with other vehicles or any injuries, the derailment did cause some damage to the adjacent concrete and the brickwork owned by Portland State University. Portland State University submitted a demand of $59,780 for repair. Risk Management requested a second estimate from Portland State University, engaged in additional discussions with them, and was able to reach an agreement. The total amount of the proposed settlement is $49,580. Upon passage of the ordinance, a payment of $49,580 will be issued to Portland State University. Commissioner Hardesty, did you, I don't know if is there somebody from Risk Management here? Could you come on up, because I think Commissioner Hardesty has a question or two. I do. And if you could just introduce your names for the record, please. And I also want to acknowledge that you were here a long time. Thank you for your patience.
I'm sorry, Jessica, can you turn the mic on?
Just a bit closer.
And turn it
Just
on.
turn it on, hit the gray button. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, Commissioners, I'm Jessica Bird. I'm with Risk Management. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. And today I brought with me Catherine Levine with Portland Streetcar.
Thank you both for being here. So my question was, is it a malfunction of the streetcar? And if so, what have we done to make sure it doesn't leave the track again?
In this instance, our investigation revealed that the streetcar left the tracks due to a loss of shunt or connection.
A loss of what?
Shunt. And this was largely a maintenance issue with
I'm sorry, what is a shunt?
Do you want, Catherine can explain it a little bit more technically than I can.
Well, no, Dave, you're just explaining it to your
You're
friend in the
explaining it
elevator.
to lay people, so we don't need technical, we just need, huh?
So the train system, the trackway is connected to signals and switches via
Okay.
conduit. And my understanding is that the metal wheels of the train riding on the track, in effect, are providing notice, hey, the train is here, it's occupying that spot. Loss of shunt would be in the fall with a lot of leaf debris, or if there's someone leaves debris on the track and it gets ground up, you can get enough separation between the metal wheel, always strange to say that, and the track. And then you have loss of shunt.
Okay.
Thank you, I understand that. And is this an anomaly? Or is this something that you're being proactive about ensuring that the tracks are going to be clean so that we don't have these derailments in the future?
So this occurred in November of 2018 We did, in fact, do a full investigation. We work with and provide those investigative reports of incidents to the State Safety Oversight. We look for causal and contributing factors. We then have a final report that provides for recommendations and mitigations to prevent it from occurring again. In fact, on October 29th this year, we had a second derail. So the actions that were taken in response obviously did not prevent the events that occurred just recently. We have an active, ongoing investigation. I don't want to presuppose the answer. I certainly believe we're headed in the right direction. But similarly, the investigation will conclude with what actions we should take to prevent it from occurring again. And I believe, to be precise and non-committal at the same time, that we will be taking actions to add additional infrastructure there, almost like a redundancy, to prevent a reoccurrence.
So am I correct that the accident happened at the same location, or is it a different location?
No, it's the same location. It is the single track at Montgomery between 4th and 5th.
Last question. You said there was a report to the state safety whatever. Do we get a copy of it?
You could certainly have a copy of it, yes. It's the ODOT Rail State Safety Oversight Office.
And, and so that actually raises a question, right? Because we contract with the streetcar to provide services, and you report to the state. But unless we intentionally get copies of it, we don't know. Are there other reports that are going to the state that we should be receiving so that it actually informs the votes that we take?
Yeah, so the streetcar staff, including the safety officer, are all city employees. And the state recognizes the city as the owner and operator of the system.
Right.
We do contract with TriMet for the actual operators and mechanics who are an essential part of the system. But overall, we are recognized, we the city, as the owner-operator. So we have all the reports that our safety officer does for every collision. Again, looking at causal and contributing factors. We provide those to the state and have records and can provide those to elected officials, certainly.
I would recommend that in the annual report, we add something about safety improvements, because your annual report is always very glowing about all the great, wonderful things that you're doing, and it would be helpful to have the totality in that one report, right? We probably don't need to read the 800 and some odd page state report, but including lessons learned would be very helpful in your annual report.
We can provide that. Our safety officer actually does an annual review of all collisions, injuries, and events. We do that internally so that we can identify where we need to make improvements, and we could certainly include that in the annual report.
Thank you. That would be helpful. I'm done. Thank you.
Very good. Any other questions? Thank you for that clarification. I learned a lot. Appreciate your being here.
Take testimony.
Oh, yeah. Is there any public testimony on this item?
I had 3 people sign up.
All right, 2 minutes each, please.
Shedrick J. Wilkins, Maggie, and Wayne Darrell Silvari Voice.
I think Cedric may have been the only one who stuck it out. Come on up. Thanks. You don't have to stay up here if you don't want. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your testimony. Good afternoon.
Cedric, I didn't know the details of this. Mayor Wheeler should know that I am actually an anti-PSU person. I have a degree from there. I didn't get anything on it. I like community colleges. And so whenever there's some sort of thing, I thought this was some research study where somehow PSU was stiffed or something. And I take the trolley all the time. I think it's a great thing. And if this is a maintenance problem, they need to fix it. But, I really would prefer money going to community colleges. You had a thing at the division's PCC Center. I think that's great about alternative energy. I find PSU should not get money and say, well, we did the research wrong and the city's bothered about that. I don't like those things. But I use the trolley all the time. I'm getting old. I get on TriMet, and I use it all the time and go around, and it's better than walking.
Yes.
It is.
Thank you.
I'm getting
Appreciate
too
it.
old to walk.
Nonsense.
Me too.
All right, that completes public testimony. Carla, please call the roll.
Udaley,
I want to thank staff for being here all morning. I know it's not the most efficient use of your time. I vote aye.
Fritz,
Aye.
Hardesty,
Aye.
Wheeler.
New Jeopardy word, shunt. I vote aye. Ordinance is approved. We're adjourned till 2 PM.